Good morning and welcome to the first meeting of the Local Government and Communities Committee in 2020. And can I remind everyone present to turn off their mobile phones. Agenda item 1 is consideration of whether to take agenda items 5 and 6 in private. Item 5 is consideration of evidence heard today on the Period Products Bill, and item 6 is consideration of evidence heard from the Accounts Commission. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. That's agreed. Agenda item 2 is an evidence session on the Period Products Free Provision Scotland Bill. Today, I welcome Aileen Campbell, Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government, and Dr Elaine Moyer, Team Leader, Access to Sanitary Products and Social Innovation Partnerships, Scottish Government. Good morning. I also welcome Monica Lennon, who introduced this member's bill. She will have the opportunity to ask a couple of brief questions once committee members have finished with theirs. And I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. I welcome the opportunity today to set out the Government's views on the bill. And I'd like to begin by saying that Scottish Ministers fully believe in the principle of ensuring that everyone who needs to access period products can do so. And I'm proud that we've taken significant and world-leading action on this issue in the past 2 years, and that other countries, both within and out with the UK, have sought our advice and learning and considering their own actions. It's clear that delivery of our policies is still in the early stages and that we are in a rapidly developing situation. Innovative practices across sectors are evolving, and we're learning and changing what we do, and delivery partners do as a result. We also need to remember that passing this bill would mean that the responsibility for provision of period products would fall entirely to the state, making this the only material item the Scottish Government has legal obligation to provide. So what we must consider carefully is whether legislation is the best way of achieving the desired benefits. I believe, and many of those who responded to your call for written evidence agree, that before even considering whether legislation is needed, we should fully assess the outcomes, successes and any shortfalls in current activity. And that is one of the reasons Scottish Government did not, when the opportunity was there in March last year, commit to bringing forward our own legislation on this policy. Throughout the bill and wider supporting documents, Monica Lennon points out that she's given the Government flexibility to deliver on the requirements of the bill. However, in trying to build in that flexibility, the result is unfortunately a bill with little clarity on the true policy intent and detail, making it difficult for Parliament to assess. And I note that many of those who support the principle of legislation are strongly opposed to the preliminary procedure for delivery proposed in Section 3. In fact, this is a bill that, had it been introduced by the Scottish Government, would have faced criticism from opposition parties due to that lack of clarity. It would also have been almost impossible to undertake our duty to carry out the statutory impact assessments due to the vagueness of the provisions, a task that members are not required to undertake for their bills. And we also believe that it would be extremely challenging to meet the timeframes of putting in place a universal scheme, particularly when there is little detail about how within 12 months of the bill receiving royal assent. As committee members noted in the first evidence session, the Scottish Government would have to conduct extensive consultation and planning before regulations could be drafted, let alone any scheme that could be implemented. These are all things that have not been done already, because the bill provides that the detail of the universal scheme should be set out in regulations rather than those being included in the bill itself. So moving on, we estimate that the proposed costs are underestimated, both due to the estimated cost of products used, the delivery of costs of a right-based scheme and estimated uptake. And I've covered some of those issues in my letter to the committee, and know that the committee raised some of those issues when taking evidence on the bill last month. I also note that if Parliament passes this bill at stage 1, Scottish ministers are expected to bring forward a financial resolution committing to meet the costs of implementation. And we'd have to bring this forward before the scheme is set out in regulations, when it's clear that the nature of the scheme will fundamentally impact on the cost. And the lack of clarity poses significant challenges to understanding the likely cost to the public purse, and by extension the level of future spend the Scottish ministers would be committed to by bringing forward such a resolution. So while stage 1 is primarily for consideration of the principles of the bill, which we believe are underdeveloped, we believe potential cost is also an issue that the committee and wider Parliament should consider at this point. So to be clear, it is not that the Government disagrees with the need to ensure period products are available to all women who need them. In fact, we have clearly made huge progress in the past few years in meeting that aim. Almost 400,000 school pupils and students at colleges and universities right across the country are now benefiting from products that we fund, as have almost 60,000 people on low incomes. Products are beginning to be made available by over 20 public bodies and across public spaces, including libraries, community centres and sports clubs. Again, this is through our action. And the private sector is beginning to act too, without the need for legislation, with football clubs, pubs and even construction companies making products available for staff and for visitors. In addition, we've focused our efforts, something as the Minister for Poverty I believe is hugely important, on those who would struggle to access products if we did not make them available, and have done so guided by the principle of dignity. Now, of course, we know that there is and are still improvements to be made. As I said earlier, it's a policy that continues to evolve, but we do believe we are beginning to see a culture change, and there is a risk that introducing legislation now would encourage people to meet only minimum standards compared to what we're seeing in the public, private and third sectors, where organisations are going above and beyond. So, Convener, let me be clear, championing the need to ensure period dignity exists across the country is not just warm words from myself or the government, but is actively being delivered and invested in right now and without legislation. And I believe that we can get further, faster and with better outcomes for those who most need our help by those means. So I look forward to taking your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. You've kind of, to a great extent, answered the question I was going to ask you about how you see a need for this bill or not, but is there not anything in the bill that you think that the Scottish Government has to get to within the near future, or do you think it's more appropriate that you wait to see how the existing provisions are going first?
Well, I think already over the last couple of years, we've seen policy adapt, policies change, be much more reflective of what the need is and responding to the need of, for instance, pupils in schools who have, you might have supposed that it would be the best way to do it would be to deliver through making them products available in toilets, but actually some children and some young people have said that they would rather not have that. So we have to adapt and change and evolve what we do and how we've done it, and we have done that over the last 2 years. So there is still more that we need to do. In fact, the Young Scot report that's out today points to areas of improvement. So we're not saying that what we've done is the end point. We're not saying that we're finished in trying to make the improvements. The Young Scot report today points to where we need to make further improvements. And of course, we continue to adapt and change and push and promote the policy. And also, by all the things that I've outlined today, we're also engaging with international partners. We're working with Malawi and in Rwanda, and we're trying to do much more than I think the bill sets out, and ensuring that we try and meet the needs of women across the country and meeting those needs with a principle of dignity.
You talk about flexibility being sort of at the heart of it. If flexibility is at the heart of what you're doing just now, and this bill came in, would that add hugely to the cost then, if you're going to have to make lots of different methods available for the access to these products?
Well, I think as the bill is drafted, for instance, with the C-card as being a potential option, I think sometimes that ends up being far too prescriptive. And what we have seen is that there's been a real benefit in us being able to develop and work with partners, co-produce, and work out what works and what works effectively. And that flexibility has been really valued, and it's been valued, I think, in the submissions and the responses that you've had from the folk that you've taken evidence from. And, that's a fundamental and underpinning way in which we're working with this. We want it to meet the needs of people who require the products, and we want to make sure that it's delivered without the barriers, but also underpinned by the principle of dignity. And that's why we've also co-produced the guiding principles as well, to make sure that what we have as a framework there to make sure that we do have that flexibility and that we do meet the needs of people, but also do so with a guiding principle of dignity.
Okay, can I just ask, is there any comments you'd like to make on...
Sorry, can I get my speaking... Just so I can make sure I can refer back to them, if that's okay. I'll make sure that you can get my speaking notes at the end, but if it's possible, just to keep a hold of them, if that's okay. Sorry.
Right, okay, we want you to do it without any speaking notes at all.
No, it's more, it's just in case if anyone asks me questions about what I've said, if I can make sure that I have a record of what I did say. Thank you.
No, not at all. It's an interesting start to the year. Do you have any comments on the letter that Monica Lennon sent in response to your submission?
Well, again, I don't think, and I've met with Monica about the bill as well, and I think, there's a lot of agreement as well. And, I did say in my remarks, that we do agree that we should make sure that people have access to products and supported to access those products who cannot at the moment access them. And so there's lots of things that I think we agree with. However, I think the bill at this point in time, when we're continuing to evolve and adapt this policy approach, working with, co-producing the policy with different groups and organisations and individuals, that I think at this point in time, the bill doesn't enable us to continue on that basis. And there's also risk that the flexibility is lost, that the innovation, the imagination with which this policy has been taken forward is lost. And also, again, I would just point out to the committee, and it's for you to decide, that the costs are also something that are significant that we need to be mindful of when approaching this through the universal system that has been proposed in the bill, which our system has not been designed to do. We're putting forward investment into schools and education settings, and that's been rolled out and universally accessible from pupils in schools. But our other work is around targeting it towards people who require additional support. And again, that flexibility, the cost, that risks being lost at this point in time through the legislative approach that's been taken. But I wouldn't want to rule out in the future legislation. These things are not things that we want to rule out in the future. I think at the moment we feel it's a bit premature when we're continuing to adapt this policy. It's continuing to evolve. There's momentum behind it. There's culture change already happening. And I think, the danger is also with legislation, you kind of retreat back to something that has as a lesser offer than what's currently there at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Just one last thing, and then the couple of my colleagues want to come in. How is there such a huge discrepancy in the costings?
So I think we have our assumptions that are on the basis of a higher product cost, which is a much truer reflection of the actual costs at the moment. The other areas where there is an increased cost is that our age range is wider than Monica Lennon's assumptions, and also, for instance, in the education settings and schools, it's not done over our working is not on the basis of school term or from 9 o'clock till 3 o'clock. It's about making sure that young people have access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week over the whole course of the year. So all of those reasons, that increases the costs. And of course, our current approach, which is low in bureaucracy, it's about making sure we can get direct access to products for people, doesn't have those costs, those are additional bureaucratic costs, doesn't have postage costs attached. And so all of those things together then start to creep up the costs. And, that's why it suddenly escalates in the way that we've pointed out. We have to, as a government, we have to work through these things. Any bit of legislation, you have to work through the cost, the financial implications, make assessments, make assumptions as well. So again, that's where we're basing our submission to you about why the costs stand to and are much higher than the financial memorandum that Monica Lennon attached to her bill.
Okay, thank you. Kenny, you wanted to come in and then...
I just want to get further clarification. I think we're all pretty... we all know where you're going with this, Cabinet Secretary, but just for clarification, do you believe that the bill is unnecessary because of all the kind of innovations that are taking place at the moment? Or do you think it's premature and should perhaps be delayed a couple of years and therefore be inappropriate to progress at this time? Or do you think that the bill, in addition to that, is too rigid, lacks detail, or lacks focus?
So I think at this point in time, it's premature, the bill. I think there is a lot that has been gained very quickly over the last 2 years through this policy, through the approach that we've taken, working in partnership, co-producing, listening and responding to the needs of individuals. That flexibility, that good work, that momentum, that drive, that innovation that we're seeing, that's at risk. It's also a continually evolving policy. So we're continuing to see people adapt and change what they do to respond to need. And I think the risk at this point in time with the bill is that it would be far too rigid, we would lose that flexibility and it wouldn't deliver on the aims that ultimately I think we share. I think Monica Lennon and I share many of those aims. And I think I wouldn't want to rule out legislation in the future, but at this point in time, I think what we're better doing is to continue to test and innovate and adapt what we do so that we can be surer of what works for people across the country, and that we can also ensure that we do that with the dignity principles that we have worked with partners to produce.
Okay, just on the issue of the financial memorandum, there's obviously a wide disparity on this. What impact do you feel if the costs associated with this bill would be at the higher end, the £25 million or so that's suggested in your submission? What impact would that have on other budget areas in your portfolio?
And that's the real risk as well, and also it's important to remember that cost is recurring. It's not a one-off cost. These are recurring costs that could stand to increase over time, especially if you've got young women and girls coming through school that are used to having access. So the increased uptake with the associated promotion of this, which is not wrong, but we have to take these considerations into account. So there is real risk that the bill costs increase significantly, as we've outlined to yourself, with the assumptions and the costings that we know are a far more true reflection of what costs are currently. And therefore, the money has to come from somewhere, and we would need to make tough choices in amongst a number of tough choices that we have to make in the budget decisions that we take as a government. So, and that's a difficult issue for us in government, isn't it? The Members' Bill, I think, is, I think the work that Monica Lennon's done, I think the principles that some of the things that we share are to be welcomed, so is the work that she's done. However, I have to, as the government minister, I have to make the budget stack up, and I have to make the budget choices, and I need to make sure that you're clear as committee members know that where we believe there are risks with this bill, and the risk is that the costs increase significantly.
I mean, one of the suggestions in this bill is that people can receive these products on demand by post. How concerned are you about that? Because that seems pretty open-ended. And I wonder what the kind of costs might be in relation to that. And conversely, if people are actually getting these products by post on demand, would there be an impact, for example, on retailers, etc., small retailers, for example, who sell these products?
Those are the things that the government have to do when we take forward legislation. We have to do business impact assessments, so that would be something that we would need to make sure that we would be factoring in. The postage costs, we believe, would be significant as well. And again, I point to the fact that what we have currently is a very low bureaucratic system that's delivering products quite directly in places where people can access them. So, and doing so with innovation, flexibility, and meeting the needs of many women, but not losing sight of the fact that we do need to make improvements, that we continue to need to make sure that women can, and girls and anyone who requires the products can access them. So the postage costs, again, are something else that you need to factor into the financial considerations of the bill and whether they're proportionate, especially when it's a rights-based universal scheme.
Okay, lastly,
and our current way of doing that, our current systems of delivering products are not on a universal basis. They're not designed to deliver a universal system.
Well, that's the point I was going to make finally, Convener, because it says the bill's policy memorandum, paragraph 5, states as one of the 3 underlying policy aims to ensure that period products are made available free of charge on a universal basis. But my understanding originally was that this was a period products bill. It was to help people who couldn't afford to buy these products, and to my mind there seems it would be a bit confusing as to whether it's a bill whereby anyone and everyone can get these products as required, or whether it is indeed to assist people who are in period poverty. What's your view of that? Is that
and I think that's where some of the lack of clarity makes it very difficult for us to think about how you would implement it in the way that's proposed, particularly when the ways that are proposed are not the things that we know from practice, are the things that people want to see this being delivered. So, the lack of clarity becomes problematic. Again, not disputing I think the shared ambitions that I think Monica Lennon and I have to make sure that we can ensure that people can access products with dignity, but there are problems with the legislation as drafted. There are considerations that we need to understand in terms of the financial implication, and the risk is we lose the good practice that we've already developed over 2 years of quick working with partners. And you know, I think that's a big risk and a big loss. And ultimately the 400,000 pupils that are already able to access it in a flexible way, that could be eroded. The 60,000 people who are in poverty, who are getting support to access products in a flexible way, that could be lost. You know, so there are a whole host of ways in which we might, I think, backtrack from the good work that's been made so far in pursuit of legislation that might be too rigid and might detract a bit from what we've done already.
Okay, thank you. Thanks,
Okay,
Graham.
Graham.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, Cabinet Secretary, I'm a little bit confused. You say you think this bill is premature, but you think that in the future legislation may be required. You didn't say it would be required, but may be required. What circumstances can you envisage under which it may be required?
I mean, I guess I was saying that because, you know, I think you can't rule out legislation in the future. I mean, it might become that it becomes necessary in the future. All I was making the point was it's not the principal objecting to legislation that we're against. I think what we're against at the moment is the fact that the way that legislation currently is drafted doesn't enable us to continue with the flexibility, the innovation that we currently have. And it could be that actually you don't ever need legislation if the momentum, the culture change that we're currently seeing continues to evolve and we continue to adapt the provision. It was more a point that it's not the legislation per se that we're against, it's the actual principles and the detail within the bill which we feel lack the clarity, and it doesn't have the right financial assumptions that we think, and the universal application which we think perhaps may erode the flexibility and the innovation that we're currently seeing. So it was more a...
So you're not against there being legislation?
I'm just not ruling it out in the future. I wouldn't want to rule it out. It might not be for me to decide. I'm saying what I'm saying is that at the moment, what we have is a system that's developed and evolving, that's innovative, that is flexible, that's delivering for people currently, and we wouldn't want to lose that through legislation that's drafted that could erode that.
Right. So your view, basically, your view is, let me just summarise what I think your view is, and you tell me if I'm right. That you think there is a lot of good work going on at the moment, which there is. No doubt about that. So given that good work is going on in the public sector and indeed in the private sector, you think at the moment there is no need to legislate because things are happening anyway?
Yeah, absolutely.
fair
Lots of great work, not just in the public and third sector, but the private sector as well. Culture change that we're seeing, momentum behind it, driving it forward, with innovation, with that flexibility and that responsiveness to individuals' needs. And it continues to adapt and evolve. So at this point in time, if you lost that flexibility, what would you be legislating? Because at the moment we're having to change what we do. So we might have assumed, like I said, the best way to deliver this is through toilets, but we know through working with some young people that some young people in some schools have said they don't want that. And so you have to respond to those needs, and that's why you continue to test, co-produce, work out what are the better ways to try and make sure that we get these products to people who require them. And at this point in time, I think that would potentially be lost with legislation that could be too rigid and lack that flexibility and ultimately cost a lot of money and not deliver as well as we are currently delivering without that legislation, without the good work, without the partnership, without the the sense of duty that so many people at the moment are currently showing to ensure that Scotland can claim to be a world leader in this.
Okay, so the bill basically would get you, Government Minister, to set in regulations a scheme which would mean public sector bodies like councils and schools would have to operate a scheme. There's a cost to them, which, according to the bill, you would have to fund. Are you aware of any other legislation that does this, that creates a cost on a public body that then the government has to fund?
Don't think so, no.
No.
But and that's where we think the financial memorandum is flawed. We think the assumptions that are in the financial memorandum are not correct, that the cost stands to be significantly higher than outlined, and that, you know, at the moment we are working with our partners across the public and third sector, supporting financially and delivering for people at the moment. And, you know, I think there needs to be a question of proportionality as well in here. If we increase the cost but actually don't deliver the outcomes that we're currently delivering, then is legislation the right approach to this? And at this point in time, I don't think so.
No, I thought it was pretty unique as well. But you mentioned, it's my last question for the moment, Convener, the drafting of the bill is quite vague in parts. It is vague, and we can explore this with the member next week. But one section, section 8, payments by Scottish ministers. I'll just read it to you. The Scottish ministers may make such payments as they think appropriate to the council's bodies, persons and education providers obliged under this Act. So that's all very vague. May make such payments as they think appropriate. So obviously, you know, that means any government, any future government could change its mind on what they think is appropriate. So you could have a scheme, and I guess I'm just making a point, you can respond to it if you like. You could have a scheme set up and a government deciding not to fund it under the way this is written at the moment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
That's the way I read
and,
it.
You know, again, from the fundamental point that I've made many times now is that we are currently delivering a huge amount, delivering positive outcomes. Culture is changing. There's momentum behind this, and it would be a real pity for that to be lost in pursuit of legislation that could erode an awful lot of that and cost an awful lot more.
Thanks.
Sarah?
So is that about the design of the legislation, or is that about the principle of the legislation? Because on the one hand, you think the bill is far too tightly designed, it's far too detailed, and on the other hand, the financial comments you're making about the difficulty of predicting how much it would cost is that it's not detailed enough.
Well, some of the financial costs are wrong. They don't reflect the current situation. So the £9 unit cost, we believe, would actually be more likely to be £17. So we can quickly say that that's inaccurate and not reflective of the ways in which the current cost of delivery at this point in time. The other areas where we would point to problems with the bill is that there is the one part of the scheme that's suggested as the C-card scheme, and even the submissions that you've had and the people who gave evidence to you said that that's not a scheme that they would like to see in place. And again, this is where I think, you know, this legislation comes at a point in time when actually at this point in time we're evolving what we do, adapting what we do so it responds to needs, and so we can be much more clear and certain about what are the delivery mechanisms that would respond to the need of individuals. And so that's one area where there's probably a suggestion of a scheme that wouldn't work, and in others it's left up to government to come up with a scheme as well. So there's not the sense of detail there that that I think you were making. And you know, if the government has to come up with a scheme that is flexible and delivers, then that's what we're currently doing. We're currently delivering with flexibility and innovation products to people who require them in the here and now. So, you know, I think, and I know that I responded to Graham Simpson on his question around legislation. I think at this point in time, the legislation is not required. And if there is to be legislation at any point in the future, far better to make sure that we know what we're doing and we understand it clearly about what works and where we can ensure that flexibility is maintained.
Just trying to tease out, because clearly you think the bill's premature in principle.
Yeah, I think
so
it's unnecessary.
Pardon?
I think it's unnecessary at this point in time.
Yeah, so both unnecessary and
but
just not needed at the moment. So I'm trying to tease out the principles about the balance of the top line of the bill and then the fact that the Scottish Government would be required to actually regulate and decide the details. So it would give you that degree of flexibility that you're keen to have. In terms
but it's
of
a universal
outputs rather
scheme.
than
It's a
inputs.
universal scheme based on rights. So it would have to significantly change dramatically. In fact, it would wreck the bill if you changed it so much that that took away the universal element of it, or took away the some of the proposals. And again, if flexibility is what's in delivery of products is what is being asked of government, then we're doing it.
Yeah, well, I think it was not just flexibility, localism was a key issue that came
And
up.
that's what we're delivering
So that-
at this point in time as well.
So that in different organisations at different levels, you could do that. But again, that's up to the current players, so that could stop at any point.
Yes, but at this point in time, what we're seeing is not a retreat. It's actually expansion of more organisations doing a lot more than has ever been done before, a real drive and desire to want to provide products, and doing so in a way that has been long overdue and meets the needs of individuals. And that's what's at risk of being lost here. And if the ask of us is to deliver something flexibly with localism, with organisations able to adapt what they do, then that's currently what's happening. So I guess
so
then the question is, what is it? What is the legislation then adding to? And also, is the cost proportionate? Because at the moment, the bill will cost far more than what's set out in the financial memorandum, and much more than what we're currently spending, and deliver not as much as what we're doing at the moment.
So can I just clarify, is there anything in the bill that you think would be worth legislating on, or is that a future debate you'd rather have and not just now?
Well, I think, again, I go back to the point at this point in time is we are making and developing and evolving policy approaches, and with flexibility, delivering for individuals in the here and now. And if that's at risk of being lost, then I don't think I could support this bill at this point in time.
No aspects of it. Just okay.
But again, though, we don't object to some of the policy ambition that Monica Lennon has. We've talked about it, and I think we share an awful lot of that aspiration. But the bill, as it's currently drafted, is something that I think would erode the good work that's happening already.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Andy?
Thanks so much, Convener. I just want to cover a number of questions dealing with the kind of principles of all of this. I mean, all the witnesses that have given us oral evidence support the bill and feel that there is a need for legislation. I mean, you'll be aware that you're representing the executive branch of government, and we're a committee of the legislature, and our job is to pass laws for the people of Scotland. Now, I think the work you're doing is commendable and has been widely welcomed. The point of legislation, however, is to give a guarantee to the people we represent that government will do certain things, that they have certain rights. So I just want to question you further on the need for legislation, because given that everyone who's given oral evidence supports the bill, do you not see that there is a benefit to be had from underpinning the principles that you're currently delivering in law to guarantee that, irrespective of which government comes in 2021 and may abandon the work you're doing or whatever? Do you not see the case for giving a legal guarantee that the kind of work you're doing will be continued in future, so that the young girls in school today can know that when they leave school in 10 years' time, that this provision will still be there?
Well, again, the provisions that are set out within the bill risk losing the flexibility that we are delivering at this point in time. And so the good work that you have commended, the co-production, the responsiveness that we've had to individuals, the fact that it's encouraging a momentum and a culture change across Scotland, the danger is that that would be lost and we regress back to some kind of baseline that isn't as flexible. And so we've also committed to baseline the funding to local government as well, committed to doing that. So I don't think that the issue you describe is a likelihood. So I actually think that what we've got at this point in time is an opportunity to make sure that if we have to legislate in the future, but actually at the point in time, we're working out what are the best ways to deliver. How do we deliver that's in an effective way, and doing so with partnership, without the need for legislation, making sure that this is something that we can, as a whole country, feel quite proud of and continue to deliver. And I think that's something that's pretty valuable at the moment, that all of this has been done without legislation, and that flexibility, that goodwill, that partnership through just pursuing legislation for legislation's sake is not something that I want to risk losing.
I don't think anyone's pursuing legislation for legislation's sake. You suggested that's happening. I don't think that's happening.
Well,
I think the purpose of this bill is to provide a legal underpinning, a statutory underpinning to a scheme providing period products to those who need it. You mentioned that you'd...
But with suggested mechanisms that people don't want.
Well, fine, and we can talk about how the bill could be amended. But you mentioned as well that you've guaranteed the funds will be baselined. You can't make any guarantees beyond the next election. We've had ministers sitting in this committee and we've asked them to make those guarantees, and they say, no, we cannot make guarantees. So, again, do you not understand how a young woman at school would benefit from the Parliament giving her some guarantee that in 10 years' time, such scheme that currently provides period products will still be in operation? Beyond having to take the risk at the ballot box that a government is returned that continues to support it. And she doesn't have a vote.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying. I think at this point in time, you know, what we've got is something that has been developed over, without legislation, through partnership working, through goodwill, through good work, through engagement, and I believe that will continue. That has fundamentally changed the culture in Scotland, and that young people who are coming through school at this point in time will experience the access to products that they are currently getting, and that will continue to grow and not go the other way that I think you're describing. And again, you know, the legislation point, if that ultimately erodes the flexibility, if it destroys some of the localism that you've talked about being important, then, you know, I think I would far rather work on the basis of doing this in partnership, co-producing with women and people across the country to make sure that what we can deliver works for them, and not be wedded to a bit of legislation that is too rigid, that doesn't have the flexibility, and actually the non-legislative route that delivers far better outcomes and far quicker and far faster, because that's what my focus has been over the last 2 years, is to be delivered to those young people that you've talked about in the here and in the now, without the requirement for legislation. So, and in doing so, we're changing culture, we're changing attitudes, we're changing minds. In fact, so much so that people in other countries from around the world are looking to what Scotland is doing to see how they can approach it in the same way.
Okay, can we just focus on this question of flexibility? Because you've made it very clear that you consider that this bill erodes the flexibility that you currently have to deliver a scheme.
Yes.
Now, given that this bill mandates ministers to introduce a scheme, within that scheme, there should be plenty of flexibility as to how it's designed. Could you tell me specifically which bits of the bill you consider inhibit flexibility, given that the bill gives the power to ministers to create a scheme and they're free to make that scheme as flexible as they like? What in the bill inhibits your flexibility?
Well, 2.1 asks us to make a scheme to set out and regulate how period products will be delivered. So that in itself inhibits some of the flexibility that we've had already.
How?
Because it has to ask us to specifically set out in regulation what we want to do, and that then means that if that's not captured, if the way in which something's delivered flexibly in a particular area doesn't meet the needs of the bill, then that then stops and inhibits what people might want to do.
There's plenty schemes that come through this Parliament in secondary legislation that are very, very flexible in how they're delivered.
Again, but it's asking us to set out in regulation what we need to do. And at the moment, what I'm saying to you is that the scheme, if we were to do that, then we possibly, if we to do that before we had started to kind of test and work through the different approaches that schools and organisations are doing, then it might have stopped some of that creativity.
Okay, no, but that's a separate question. If you're saying
So you might,
before you do it,
well,
what I'm saying
trying to say is that so what happens then, you regulate and you put it into prescribed within regulation, then that then limits the actions that you can take.
Yes, but it also provides a guarantee to users that they're actually going to have a scheme. Can I move on? Can I move on? Do you?
It's a matter, okay, I agree to differ. However, if what you're wanting us to do, if the ask of government is to deliver a scheme flexibly, then that is what we're currently doing.
No, understand that. Can I move on to the question of rights? Do you agree that everyone who needs sanitary products should have access to them as of right?
Well, we certainly, we know, and everyone understands, and as a woman myself, that not having access to sanitary products inhibits your young people going to school to get an education. So it inhibits their rights to access and have a decent standard of living. And, the rights issue at this point in time is particularly pertinent because that's why the First Minister's advisory group is trying to look at rights in a much more strategic way with her working group, her advisory group. And so I think some of this might be more appropriately handled through the strategic approach that we're taking to rights through that advisory group. So at this point in time, what we're doing is taking a rights-based approach to work with women, to work with individuals, to understand how we deliver this to meet their requirements. Alongside that, we're very clear that this is also about trying to make sure that those that can't currently afford and access products have that support available so that we can enable them to not have that undignified life that they have to go without because of poverty.
Okay, I'm not clear if that's a yes or no. Do you agree that everyone who needs to use period products has the right to have them free of charge? Do you agree that they should have that right, or do you not agree that they should have that right?
Well, I think at this point in time, what we're doing is taking a rights-based approach, and what we're focusing on at the moment.
I know you're saying you're taking the approach. What I'm saying is, do you believe they should have that right, or not?
What we are doing is trying to make sure that we can appropriately target this so that women who cannot
understand
access
that. I understand what you're doing.
We're going round in circles here. You've asked the same question 3 times.
Well, I think I'm entitled to an answer.
A right to access products, to people's rights to enable them to interact, to go to work, to be educated at school, have a decent standard of living. All of that can be inhibited through not having having the ability to access and purchase products. So what we're doing is funding and supporting people who are in poverty, who cannot access those products, to enable them, to support them to get access to those products.
Okay.
We're taking a rights-based approach, and we're taking a strategic approach to rights through the advisory group that the First Minister has set up.
Okay. Well, I'll just. I don't understand. I don't know if you believe there should be a right, but if I can quote you from the SNP policy, it says that SNP Council therefore believes every woman should have access to sanitary products as of right. So at least we know what the SNP position is, even if we don't know what the Scottish Government position is. Can I move on to the question of universality? You talk about the difficulties of a universal scheme. You say that if it requires a specific opt-in, then it's not really universal. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
And I think that was in response to the issue around the C card as well, which we understood was at that point in time the preferred mechanism, or a potential mechanism to deliver this scheme, and that in itself would cause a barrier, so it wouldn't enable that universal access because it would be an opt-in. So that, and I know that Monica Lennon's stepped away from the C-card scheme as being a potential mechanism, so that was the exact reason we put that in our submission to you.
So you believe that an opt-in scheme is not a universal scheme, in general terms?
Well, we made that point in relation to the proposed mechanism which was outlined in the legislation as the C card, and that's where we don't agree with that, because we don't think that was that a universal scheme and an opt-in scheme would be delivered through the C card. That didn't make sense to us. That's why the C card scheme would put additional barriers, would inhibit people's access to products, and that was the point we were making on.
Okay,
on
so that's only in relation to the C card. That's fine. Is the baby box scheme that the Scottish Government run, is that a universal scheme?
Yes.
But that requires a specific opt-in, doesn't it?
Well, you can get it. You don't have to take it.
You're offered. You're offered it. Some people don't receive that offer because they're not attending antenatal classes, etc. They may miss the opportunity.
Or they don't take it.
Yeah, indeed, but it is an opt-in. It's not universal. It's a universal entitlement, but not an opt-in. Do you accept that the scheme the bill proposes to make is a bill to provide universal access based on the principle of a universal entitlement to period products?
Again, though, but what had been set out wasn't clear. And again, we go back to the point that our schemes that we have already delivering on are not based on that universal access. So, yeah, I do accept that what the bill's providing for is to have a universal access. What we're doing at the moment is doing that more targeted approach, delivering a universal access to people who are in education settings, and delivering it with flexibility that I don't think, again, that the bill provides us with.
Okay, moving on to costs. You mentioned in an answer, I think, to Graham Simpson previously that there would be recurring costs, which obviously there would be, and you mentioned as demand may increase, those costs may increase over time as well. But is that not the case with your current scheme? You are at the moment incurring costs, the public sector's incurring costs.
Yes.
Their expectations are being created, already have been created,
Yes.
that these products will be available broadly as people see them available now, and no doubt in future they'll want to see them continue to be available, and uptake might increase. So is there any real difference between the scheme as it exists at the moment and the scheme as envisaged in the bill in terms of the fact that costs may increase over time?
Well, yeah, because the financial memorandum's based its figures on a low unit cost, not reflective of the...
No, but that's a separate point. I'm talking about the question as to whether, whatever the costs are now, whether
so
they'll increase...
I'm responding by saying that the costs will increase because they've increased already because the financial memorandum has set out
No, but that's not the
too low a
question.
cost.
The question that the answer you gave to Graham Simpson was that in terms of the Scottish Government budget, this is not a one-off cost, it's a recurring cost. So setting aside what the actual cost is, and I understand you've got a different view on that, but setting that aside, looking at the question of the increase, whether it will be grow over years, what is the difference between the current scheme that you're operating and any scheme under this bill? Surely both have the potential to increase costs over time.
Well, yes,
Okay, that's fine.
They would include,
fine.
but we also...
Andy, draw it to a close. You've had
Well,
more than enough.
it was more to say, though, that we do, in working in partnership, there is much more control over that as well. And also, we would want women and girls and anyone who requires products to be able to access what's being delivered. So it's not about us wanting to limit, but I think what we would need to do what the consideration of the committee needs to be is that you would need to assess that uptake you would need to ensure that uptake was assessed financially so that you could have the assumptions in place to meet those costs. And they are recurring costs, and the unit costs are a factor in this because they're currently set too low, and that would already increase the cost in comparison to what's been set out in the financial memorandum. It's a universal scheme, so again, with further bureaucracy attached to it, with postage attached to it, a whole host of other ways in which the costs would be increased and recurring. At this point in time, we have a low bureaucratic scheme that's delivering directly to schools, to other areas of public use, and to doing so in a way that is responsive to what people have told us they require. So, yes, the costs may, in theory, increase under what we're doing at this point in time, but without the control over it that we have at the moment, we would be needing to do a bit more work, and I think the committee needs to do a lot of consideration about what those costs might be within the context of the bill.
And just finally,
Very briefly.
when you say the costs, you're focused on the costs incurred or to be placed upon the Scottish Government.
Well, that's...
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
The bill provides a duty, for example, education providers to provide free products. It doesn't say that the Scottish Government must pay for them.
And I think your evidence suggested that it had to be fully funded, didn't it?
Well, the evidence might suggest that. The evidence might. I'm talking about the bill. I'm talking about the bill. It places a duty. It places a duty. Well, Graham Simpson's already noted this. The Scottish ministers may make any payments as they think appropriate. They're not mandated to.
Okay.
There's a duty being placed. I wish other
So if
committee members who wish to make comments could do so in their own time. I'm just.
Well, can we just stop this nonsense right now? Andy, draw it to a close and less comments off stage, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just wondering for clarification. The bill appears to me, as I read it, to provide that Scottish ministers may provide such payments as they consider appropriate to support the schemes, but they also place a legal duty on, for example, education providers. And that legal duty will have to be paid for by them if the Scottish Government doesn't contribute any of the funding. Do you agree that that's what the bill says?
I think the reality would be that this
No, I'm not asking what the reality would be. I'm asking
would
what
be
the
that
bill
would land on the
says.
government.
Okay.
Okay, right, thank you, enough. Annabelle, you were wanting to come in on these points, and then Sarah's got...
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Okay, picking up on some of the issues raised, can I just first of all say I'd noted in the Holyrood Magazine's Daily News Roundup this morning that they report on a Young Scot survey which found that almost 84% of the 2/3 of young women and girls in Scotland who receive free period products from their school, college, or university in the past year say that the initiative has had a very positive impact, with almost 9 in 10 of those saying they were less worried about having their period. So I think, given that that's what we all want to see, irrespective of getting into the detail of all this stuff, you know, keeping the big picture in mind, I think that is a tremendous accolade for what the Scottish Government has actually got on and done, because it's about delivering for people, I think, and, you know, not getting bogged down in process stuff. But turning to the process stuff as we must. I mean, I raised some of these points in the evidence session we had in December. I mean, first of all, what I'm struck with is we've got a bill, okay, that appears to outsource the key provisions of what you would expect to see in the bill, i.e. the delivery mechanism to be employed. So the scheme that is to be employed. There is an attempt in the bill to suggest a scheme, which it seems is not going down very well with stakeholders, that is the voucher scheme. So that seems to be a no-no and discredited. So we seem to have the proposal of legislation, but the heart of the legislation isn't actually here, which, and I'll get onto that in a minute, seems to cause then a lot of problems in terms of how we try to envisage what would happen and the cost estimate of the same. But just on that general comment, Cabinet Secretary, would that be your understanding as well, and your experience of having dealt with all different manner of pieces of legislation, that we're looking at a bill with no core to it because it's outsourced?
And yeah, and again, I think it also stands to undo some of the good work that we're already seeing evidence through the report that has been published today through Young Scot. Those young women who are talking around the impact, the positive impact that's made on their education experience, the positive impact it's having on their mental health, the fact that people are continue to do their day-to-day activities. So, yeah, the legislation, I don't think, enables us to deliver in the way that we are currently delivering, and then that therefore leads and begs the question is, what is the purpose of the legislation, particularly when you think about then the associated costs with that, whether or not those higher costs that potentially stand to deliver poorer outcomes is actually worth progressing with, as opposed to progressing with what we're already doing, which is to deliver for people across the country and deliver positive outcomes, those outcomes beginning to emerge through the reports and studies that we've seen today outlined through Young Scot.
Okay, and looking then at the key provision, the initial provision of the bill, which has been referred to already today, because it seems to me that that's where the subsequent technical and cost issues arise, which is that the statement that everyone in Scotland who needs to use period products has the right under this part of the bill to obtain them free of charge. So, in light of what has been said already, it appears to me that the Scottish Government's approach rather, which is currently, as we have heard from Young Scot, delivering day to day on the ground in terms of the broad objective being sought. But I understand from what the Cabinet Secretary said this morning that in fact in the approach that the Scottish Government is taking, it is a targeted approach. So it is targeting those who need help with regard to cost and those who need to be able to access, which is the school rollout, etc. I guess. So that seems to me to be the key difference in approach here. The Scottish Government's approach is to look at those who actually need the help, vis-a-vis access or cost, and the approach of the bill rather seems to be to say that as a matter of law, it would be if the bill passed, every single person in Scotland who needs to use period products could have them free. So it seems to be a fundamental difference, a targeted approach delivering on the ground versus a kind of general statement that everybody who wants them can get them whenever they want, including, as we've heard, through the post. But we'll get on to that perhaps in a minute.
Yeah, so the school approach has been access in schools, so that not means tested in any way, but they're accessible for pupils and students. And then by that, a far more targeted approach, working with local authorities to make them accessible in particular public places, with an understanding of them being accessible through people who may require them more. Alongside that, then investment into a fair share to have a very targeted approach to people who are in poverty, to help target them and support those particular individuals who will struggle with day-to-day costs more generally, but also in this instance struggle to meet the costs of this need.
Well, taking that important parameter therefore, because that seems to me the key issue that leads then to the absolute fundamental here, which is the estimated costs. So we see from the financial memo, as has been stated, that the cost is about 9.7 million. I think there's been some revisions made by Ms Lennon further to her recent letter to the committee, but that's the financial memo we have before us. And the Scottish Government's response to that has been to say that taking into account the actual unit cost and the way that you would have to purchase and source and all the rest of it, together with some other additional costs, you're looking at actually not £9.7 million per annum, but £24.1 million per annum. So that already is a huge divergence. That is a per annum cost. But I would also wish to just clarify that my understanding is that in addition to that estimate on the part of the Scottish Government, you're also looking at set-up costs. We don't know what those are. The ongoing postage costs, which have been alluded to already this morning. Also, as a direct result of the language in Section 1, which I quoted, there would have to be a mechanism to ensure that this so-called right was in fact able to be enforced. And then there would have to be an appeal procedure. Sorry, I speak as a lawyer, I can't help it. There would have to be an appeal procedure. So that people who felt that their right was not being respected could therefore challenge that. So there would have to be cost estimates written in for that process as well. So my understanding, therefore, would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, that actually the 24.1 million per annum estimate that the government has put on it at this stage is actually probably quite a bit lower than at least the cost of the first couple of years as all this got set up and sorted out. And ongoing costs will be ongoing costs, whatever baseline you start with. But if you start with a baseline that is underestimating the cost by at least 50%, if not more, then your ongoing costs are going to be considerably higher, I would have thought, Mr. Whiteman, than if you got the baseline right from the outset. So my understanding, therefore, Cabinet Secretary, is... Okay, my understanding, Cabinet Secretary, is that therefore the 24.1 million is actually still an underestimate of what the total cost would be.
It could potentially be in the way that you've outlined, because there are additional factors, and those are certainly what we do believe is that the 0.9% annual running cost is not accurate at all, not a true reflection. So as I've said before, the unit costs were low, lower than the actual cost of us and our experience of delivering products at the moment in time. That based on top of the fact that our delivery, our assumptions are based on a wider age range, that we are delivering for 24/7 access, 365 days a week, as opposed to limiting it to school terms. So again, delivering far more flexibility, far more in response to people's needs than the scheme envisaged through the legislation. And of course, as increased awareness and access, and uptake will increase as well, which will increase costs too. So if there was, I think we had assessed, if there was a 5% increase over the next years of the next Parliament, that could potentially sit over the lifetime of that Parliament, that cost could be around 80 million. 80 million could be if it's a 5%. That's assuming a 5% increase each year. So that's a potential cost, and I have to caveat that. It's a potential assessment based on the £24.1 million that we've assessed as being the true and reflective cost. That'd be 1.5. It would be, sorry, a 5% increase. That's based, 80 million over the course of the lifetime of the next Parliament is based on a 5% increase in uptake every year. So it's just for instance, that where you can start to see costs escalate.
And picking up on a few other points already raised, my understanding from the evidence we've already received in this committee is that COSLA, for one, has made it quite clear that they would expect this to be 100% fully funded by the Scottish Government. Is that the Cabinet Secretary's understanding? Yeah,
and I read and I took great notice of what the panel said, and yeah, it would be anticipated that they would expect the government to meet those costs. So and yeah,
to meet costs which are already much higher than 9.7 per annum, which we are not. It seems actually that there's no way at this stage of fully estimating, in light of what I would say the slightly kind of confused approach with the bill, what the costs could actually rack up to be. My last question, Convener, thank you, is to go back to a point that was raised earlier. So even if we took, say, 30 million, because 24.1 plus costs of set-up, costs of appeal mechanism and so on and so forth, where's that coming from in the CAPSEX budget? What is going to have money taken away from it in order to spend the 30 million in the next budget? What would be coming out?
Well, you know, I have my budget's not as big as many of my cabinet colleagues, so we have a fairly low Ardell budget over the cost of the Child Poverty Delivery Plan. To put it into context, we've got 50 million attached to the delivering the Child Poverty Action Plan over the years of that plan. So for a one-off cost of 24 million, that perhaps puts it into context about the level of spending and the level of ask and demand across my budget and where things may need to be looked at. I'm not saying it would come from there, but I think I'm just putting that context about what we've attached to the Child Poverty Delivery Plan, 50 million over the years of that plan versus a one-off cost of 24 million, and then that recurring every year.
And so
no, Annabelle, that was your last question. Thank you very much.
So it would be a tough choice, a difficult choice. The money has to come from somewhere. And again, I would go back to the point that if the bill is looking for us to deliver local flexibility, that's what we're already doing.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, just follows on. Given the witnesses' concerns that without legislation, current funding could be removed, so what are your current plans to ensure longevity and continued funding for your current policies and free provision?
Well, as I've said, we baseline that into the local government.
Okay, and secondly, you talked earlier about your preference for us not having this bill and that you could continue the development of your current programme and innovation and flexibility. Looking at the work that you've done so far, can you roll forward and tell us what your current plans are for the next phase of analysis over the next couple of years? And can you say whether you've identified any particular groups of people who are not getting access to period products for access reasons, for cost reasons, and what the gaps are in the current provision?
Okay. Yeah. So in terms of identifying some of that, we're going to be doing a analysis and assessment work in March to understand how the community element of the work that we're doing is impacting and developing, so that will enable us to then have a far better understanding of what more we need to do. The Young Scot report today also talks around some of the improvements that are required and some of the areas that we need to concentrate on. The other issue that I would point to, though, in terms of developing the policy more generally, is that we are working with Hey Girls to develop an app to ensure that people understand where they can access products. And also we're about to launch a campaign very shortly around ensuring that we can tackle the stigma around periods. So that maybe gives an illustration of that we're really proud of what we're doing at this point in time. It's not the end point, and we're continuing to push what we can do to not just though look at the issue around poverty, but also kind of use that as the hook to kind of describe and articulate some of the challenges around the stigma associated with poverty as well, which is why we're doing the campaign, and it's why we're continuing to work with Hey Girls around the app to ensure that people can access the funding, access the products.
So I think in our evidence, a key issue was that although there's lots of innovative work and lots of provision in schools and further and higher education, for people who are not in schools, further higher education, but who are on low incomes, there are still major challenges.
And that's why we've provided funding to local authorities to ensure that there's access to products in public places, so libraries, other public spaces as well, to make sure that other people and more people can access them too. And there's already been workplaces starting, we've written and engaged with our public bodies as well to ensure that they are meeting requirements of the policy intent here too. So yes, absolutely accept that there's more to be done and that there is more work required. That's why we will be assessing in March. That's why we continue to look at the impact in the education settings as well, and intend to publish a report on that too. It's why we're continuing to work with Hey Girls to ensure that people have a much more keener sense of where they can access products. And it's why we're going to be doing a campaign as well around period stigma. And also the other element to that work as well that I would point out to is that we, along with Marine Scotland, funded Zero Waste Scotland to do work on reusable products as well, to ensure that that was something that was available and understood and accessible. And I think I mentioned, but we're doing international work, working in Malawi and Rwanda to ensure that women internationally can, where we have existing international development relationships, can access products too. So far bigger and broader than the legislation.
Okay. See that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But and regardless of what the outcome of all of this is, when we do the assessment, when we do the reporting, then we can make sure that we can share that with the committee.
Thank you very much. Alexander?
Thank you.
And then,
Cabinet Secretary, there's been lots of things discussed this morning, and I think it's opened a gambit of where we are, what we want to achieve, and how this bill may or may not support or supply the provision that we want. You've talked about accessibility, you've talked about the current scheme, the flexibility you have, but in your opening statement you talked about the minimum standard. And I get from that when you talk about the minimum standard, when we're looking at products that you have at the moment in the scheme, the quality, the provision, the scope, the range of products at the present moment are well known and of a quality that the majority of people are very happy with. We've discussed today about the likelihood of the cost situation coming into this if it does change. The standard of that quality may change depending on the cost elements that come into this, because in any circumstances when you look at giving a much larger scope and giving a much bigger, broader outlook, that affects the cost and that can sometimes affect the standard and the quality that takes place. Do you envisage that could be the case if this bill was then put out universal?
There is every chance of that happening, and that would be regrettable too,
Yep.
because at this point in time we know. So, for instance, when I visited Edinburgh University, there were a variety of products very known products, branded products, alongside reusable products, newer to the market products as well, in an attempt to ensure that people could shift towards some of those products along with that. The higher cost, but higher one-off cost, things like moon cups and reusable pads as well. So that variety is getting already shown and distributed to across many different institutions. And yeah, I suppose in many respects that would be a pity if that was lost because of the cost issue.
And that could very well be a consequence, and incidental consequences, because of trying to broaden the horizons and create more access. That would mean that could suffer. And that is something that none of us want to see in this situation, because we want to ensure that the quality in the process is there. Now, when we took submission from Hey Girls and others, they talked about the reusable products. And there wasn't a high uptake on that at present. But if and when people started to use that type of product, that then changed the dimension. And that became something that they were content to deal with. But you would have to have some kind of process or to ensure that there was an understanding across the piece, so individuals felt comfortable in doing and changing from that product. You've already identified that some are trying to do it, and it may be through experience or a scheme that gives understanding. But at the same time, that is still going to cause some barriers and continues to cause barriers in the provision that is available. But by changing the provision and trying to enhance that provision, that jeopardises some of that process as well.
I kind of think I can recognise the risk that you're pointing out to, and I suppose the committee will need to consider that risk when you deliberate on the legislation. At this point in time, though, we are working, like I think I said, with Marine Scotland and Zero Waste Scotland to try and amplify the messages around the reusable products and the need to think a bit more sustainably around the products that are used. So that's good work. Sometimes that jars against, people who are living in poverty, where that might not be your immediate consideration. So I think at this point in time, we're having to do a number of different things. And I think that's why at this point in time, the flexibility that we have, the ability to try different things, the ability to work with different partners and to really explore what more we can do, that the flexibility that we have at this point in time and the culture change that we're beginning to see happen is really valuable, and we can start to share that good practice and understand that knowledge.
Elements of the bill that we have in front of us jeopardise some of that.
Yeah, I would say so, yes.
So
I think the flexibility, potentially, all of these things could be undermined, and I don't think that's the intention.
No.
But I think
that's the consequence.
Possibly what could happen.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Kenny.
Okay, thank you very much. Kenny, you wanted one briefly?
Yes, just one point, really. Convener, thank you very much for letting me in again. Cabinet Secretary, if delivery of period products to those who most need them could best be secured at this time through legislation, would the Scottish Government, with the resources available to it, not have introduced its own bill, given its continuing work in this area?
So I think, again, because of I think I said in my opening remarks, is that we decided not to take the bill or adopt the bill, or because we thought that at that point in time, what we're far better doing is working through some of the delivery models and working through the different partners that we can work with and ensuring that we can have that flexibility, the different products, the different range of different policy areas that they were now working through in terms of sustainability, in terms of dignity, all of those things. So at that point in time, we decided not to, because we feel that the flexibility that we're currently working within, the kind of parameters that we're working in at the moment, is far more valuable.
So the point again is it's just that legislation is not appropriate at this point, whether it's from the Scottish Government or anyone else.
I would say so. I think, for the risks that I've outlined, the cost implication, and the cost implications being significant and not necessarily delivering better outcomes. Again, I think the aspiration that I think we all share with Monica Lennon, recognise the work that has been done, recognise the huge amount of work that's been done by so many organisations and individuals across the country who are really enabling Scotland to say that it is a world leader in terms of this policy at this point in time, and doing so without that legislation. and delivering positive results, as has been articulated through the Young Scot report today. Not taking away, though, the fact that we do need to do more and that there are other areas that we'll need to work on. But at this point in time, we're delivering a huge amount. In a short space of time, we've delivered a huge amount, achieved a great deal, and done so with investment, and are tackling some issues that other countries haven't faced up to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Monica, you've got a couple of questions you'd like to ask.
Thank you, Convener. It's been a really helpful session. Just a couple of questions then in remarks to the Cabinet Secretary. And I think other members have touched on the fact that whilst there's been fantastic progress, and I'm glad the Minister's committed to that continuing, but there are gaps out there where people still find themselves in periods poverty. I want to pick up on the education settings, because what we've heard about today pretty much is universal access to anyone in education, and we know from the evidence we've heard that that's not only to pupils and students, but staff and visitors to campuses can access the products. And the Cabinet Secretary said that she would intend for that to be sort of on a 24/7 basis. We know there's holiday packs and people can get products out with term. So in terms of the current schemes, is it fair to say that what we have in the education sector is a universal scheme?
Provided you're in a education setting.
So anyone in school, college or university benefits from universal entitlement?
Yeah, they can access. They have an access. They can access it if they want to.
They can access it. Okay.
And
Thank you.
But we do know there are probably schools that require a bit more support and help, and that's why there is a requirement for us to continue to share good practice and to kind of work with authorities in school settings to make sure that all young people are able to have that access.
Okay. Is there anyone in Scotland who benefits from legal rights to access period products?
There's provision within the prison settings.
Okay.
So
And
there's
is there any
I think
learning?
there's legislation. I think you discussed that at one of your sessions.
Yeah. So I think you're correct to say that
Yeah.
that prisoners have a legal right to access period
Yeah.
products. So if that's quite well established in the prison setting, why would the transition from the current scheme to giving people in education that same legal right, why would that not work at this time?
Well, I don't think that's what the bill's necessarily. It's a universal beyond education settings. I think there's
But if we just-
provision within the bill. So
Well, I was
at this
referring to the
point-
education part of the bill at the moment, because the universal scheme is different from the duty in education.
Sure. So at this point in time, without legislation, through flexibility, and also I think the other point is I think that within your legislation you talk about having them within toilets. And we know from some pupils that they don't want to have that access through toilets at this point in time. That might change. That might change as cultures change and awareness develops. So that might change. So I think, again, I understand, I think, the point you're trying to make. However, the framing of the bill and the cost implications that you've done have been underestimated, and we understand the intent, and we know that sometimes it is tough for to do members' bills, but at this point in time, the costs that you've put through are not reflective of the actual costs, and what we're doing at the moment is delivering that access to pupils and students in education settings without the need and requirement for legislation, delivering positive outcomes as outlined in the Young Scot report that's published today, and doing all of that with a partnership and the co-production of young people and with education partners and with local authorities.
Okay, and do you accept that what the bill is trying to do is to future-proof that right and to lock in all of that good work for the future?
Lock in potentially an inflexible system.
Well, I didn't say it was inflexible at the moment.
No, but
to
the
move on-
legislation, as I've said, is could potentially erode some of that flexibility. So what it could potentially do is lock in and future-proof an inflexible system, which wouldn't deliver the outcomes that we're currently doing and delivering at this point in time within a cost envelope that is, I think, delivering a huge amount without the bureaucracy and red tape that I think your bill will end up delivering, or could end up delivering. And that's, again, I don't think we dispute the aspiration, but don't think the legislation that has been proposed delivers what you've articulated and has the potential, I think, to possibly lock in a system that's
I
inflexible.
know I don't have a lot of time to ask questions, but if I can move on, because the bill is trying to alleviate period poverty, not just for people in education, but for anyone in Scotland who is experiencing those financial barriers or affected by period poverty. So some of the evidence we've taken is people who have health conditions like endometriosis, some women who find during the perimenopausal phase that their need for products changes, so they might need a temporary assistance with sort of monthly supply. How do current schemes help women in those situations?
Well, so again, this goes back to this when we assess the community part of our actions, where we can assess good practice. But we do know that there are people and authorities that are delivering block supplies, that they can access more than just taking a couple at a time, that they can get that block supply, and there's really good practice to show that that's working. Now, again, that's possibly where we need to do a bit more work, but that's why we're going to be doing the assessment in March of the community element of what we're delivering, so that we can understand and share that good practice, so that we can ensure that we continue to meet the needs of individuals who may require more products at particular times.
So is it the government's intention to do more to ensure that people who do need that monthly supply, whether it's frequently or just some of the time, is that something that you're working towards as part of your commitment?
Well, that again, we've got good examples of local authorities that are doing some of that already, and one of the things that we may need to do is to share that good practice. But those are things that are already happening at this point in time, where women or people are getting supported to access more than just a couple of bits of products now and again, but actually understanding that there's sometimes a requirement to access more.
Okay. There's been a lot of discussion about perceived discussion about what the bill does and what it doesn't do, and about the desire for maximum flexibility. Wouldn't the Cabinet Secretary agree that the bill does leave maximum flexibility for ministers in how they set up the statutory scheme? And in relation to the voucher scheme, or it's been talked about as an S card, or based on the C card model, which Andy Whiteman pointed out is SNP policy from 2016, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the bill does not mandate this, but it was put forward as an option, but that can easily be amended and taken out of the bill?
So the ask of us is to deliver flexibility with local discretion about how that might look. But that's what we're currently doing at this point in time. Now, I understand that you're saying that the C card, or whatever you want to call it, voucher scheme, can be taken out or amended within the bill, but fundamentally that's what the legislation before us has articulated, and that's not what folk want.
Okay, just final question, the last question, very brief.
And that, when the SNP possibly passed the motion a number of years ago, that might have been done with good intent. However, it might not have been done with the experience and knowledge of working with, co-producing with women, understanding the needs, the barriers that might put up to people. So that's why that's not our chosen route. That's why we've not done that, and that's why I think it was regrettable the bill had that women didn't want within your bill. So again, the aspiration and vision is not something I don't think we dispute, but I think ultimately the way in which it's been drafted is not necessarily going to deliver it in the way that we're currently delivering in the here and now for people across the country.
Okay, last question. I know you've got to move on, and I know the shift away from universalism, but are there any circumstances in which the Scottish Government could support this bill through further amendments and further discussion if we're trying to get to the same place, which is to alleviate period poverty and improve access to period products?
So again, we don't. I don't think we disagree on aspiration of what we want to achieve. I think, though, however, the bill doesn't deliver, and it doesn't deliver the outcomes that we are currently delivering for people across the country. There is risk that we undo some of the good work. There is real risk that the costs are likely to increase significantly, And again, that'll be a decision for the committee to consider, but those are real risks. And in that respect, if I was to, on balance, decide whether or not we support a bit of legislation that costs more and doesn't deliver the outcomes that we're currently delivering, or do we continue to progress with the action that we're taking at the moment, with investment we're putting in, that's delivering results, that has been talked about today in the Young Scot report, then I wouldn't support the legislation, because what we're doing at the moment is delivering far more for people across the country and delivering better outcomes.
Thank you. Can I just, thank you, Monica. Can I just ask one question and one ask of you? You talked about the 5% increase, maybe ending up with a cost of 80 million.
Over the life, I would caveat that with this being about, if there is 5% increased uptake year on year over the life of
I was just
the
wondering
Parliament,
if there's any way that we could see that those workings. If you could send them to committee, that'd be very helpful. And also, you talked about period products being available in libraries and community centres, places like that. What sort of publicity goes with that, or are you intended to ramp that up?
So that's why we're going to do a more general kind of stigma campaign. But that's the kind of premise of why we're working with Hey Girls to develop the app, so that people can understand where they can access products.
Okay. And
there'll be lots of local. There's lots of. I mean, I'm aware of the authority of my own constituencies and doing promotion and highlighting where things are happening. So, but again, that's why we're working with, or going to embark upon work with Hey Girls around the app, so that people can then understand where they can access products.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary and Dr Moyer, for attending today's evidence session. I'll suspend to allow a witness changeover. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is an evidence session on the Accounts Commission report, Local Government in Scotland, Financial Overview 2018-19. This session forms part of our overall scrutiny, budget scrutiny in relation to the local government budget, and I remind members that the theme of our scrutiny this year has been long-term financial sustainability of Scottish local government. And today I welcome Graham Sharp, Chair of the Accounts Commission, who's accompanied by Fraser McKinlay, Controller of Audit, Brian Howarth, Audit Director, Christopher Lewis, Senior Auditor, and Lisa Duthie, Senior Auditor, Audit Scotland. Welcome. I invite the Chair to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. On behalf of the Accounts Commission, I welcome the opportunity to discuss our local government financial overview report with the committee. Our report this year highlights the continued financial challenges of Scotland's councils and integration joint boards, or IJBs. Since 2013-14, Scottish Government funding to councils has decreased by 7.6% in real terms. However, in 2018-19, Scottish Government funding to councils was relatively stable, with a 1.1% cash increase equivalent to a 0.7% reduction in real terms. This stability continued into 2019-20 with a 2.9% cash increase. Council's overall income in 2018-19, including £9.8 billion of Scottish Government funding, increased slightly to £17.7 billion, but this increase has not kept pace with the changing and increasing demands on services. Councils plan to manage a funding gap of 3%, primarily through savings, but a shortfall in achieving these meant that more of the funding gap was meant from reserves than planned. The net draw on reserves was £45 million. Two-thirds of councils have reduced their general fund reserves over the last 3 years rather than maintaining or building these. Although I am pleased to report that no council is currently at risk of eliminating their reserves in the next 3 years, continued use of reserves to manage funding gaps is not sustainable in the longer term. Councils have experienced several years of tightening budgets and have already made savings through restructurings and efficiency. But with further funding reductions forecast and the demands and pressures on services continuing to deepen, councils need to do more to redesign how they deliver and fund services so that they can continue to provide effectively for the needs of their communities. The Commission is particularly concerned about integration joint boards, which continue to face very significant challenges. In our report, we highlight that they need to do more to address their financial sustainability. Overall, IJB budgets increased by 3% to £8.6 billion. However, the majority of IJBs struggled to achieve break-even in 2018-19, with 23 of the 30 IJBs recording a deficit or relying on additional funding from partners. Having clear, complete and detailed agreed budgets is a fundamental governance tool. We note in the report that 14 IJBs did not manage to agree a budget for the start of the 2018 financial year, and just under half of IJBs had budgets that included some unidentified savings. The pace of progress with integration is slow. We have yet to see evidence of a significant shift in spending and services from hospitals to community and social care. We also note in the report the continued high level of turnover of senior staff in IJBs, with over a third changing during 2018-19. The instability this brings inevitably impacts on leadership capacity and the pace of progress. The Commission continues to emphasise the value of medium and long-term financial planning. In this overview report, we encourage IJBs as well as councils further to improve and develop their approaches to financial planning to support effective decision-making and financial management. Convener, my colleagues and I are happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much for that. Graham?
Thanks, Convener, and can I welcome you, Mr. Sharp, and your colleagues. I think some of you have not been before us before, but you're most welcome. And can I thank you for a very thorough report, as always. Some of the same themes keep recurring, and I'm sure fellow committee members will explore those. I just want to ask you something that's really very, very current and does affect councils. We've had an announcement that the UK budget will be on March the 11th. Of course, March the 11th is significant for councils because that's the last legal date that they can set their budgets. If the UK budget's set on that date, it's difficult to see how we can have a Scottish budget set before then, and we certainly can't have council budgets. So I'm not asking you to comment politically, but perhaps if you could give us a sense of the challenges that that might present to councils.
And clearly this situation is problematic, and I suppose the good news is that everyone has identified that and are working on it. But as you say, the timing and the legislation relating to the setting of a rate, which should be based on a balanced budget, simply doesn't cohere with a UK budget on the 11th of March. And I know everyone's going to be working on that, and on our part, we are very happy to participate and contribute to that. From a governance point of view, I think each council needs to be taking advice from its monitoring officer and its Section 95 officer on exactly what the position is and what it needs to do and what timescales. And I know a number of options have been floated, and I don't know what's going to happen over the next few weeks there. But Fraser, I'll invite you to comment further on that.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to add briefly, it is, as the Chair says, a really problematic and kind of unprecedented, I think, as many of you will know, having been sitting around the council table as well. So, and there are issues for the Scottish Parliament and the government and everyone else in this, and I'm sure as the Chair says, we are very happy to contribute to the discussions about how we manage this over the next few weeks. From our perspective, I think our interest as ever is in good governance, as the Chair's just described, in terms of making sure that councillors are given the right kind of information and advice, particularly from the statutory officers. It is possible for councils to set council tax without approving the overall budget. It's clearly not ideal in terms of good financial management, although I would say that given the evidence in councils these days that their medium-term and longer-term financial planning is actually in pretty good shape, they're probably in a better place to do that now than they might have been, say, 5 years ago. I think the work that councils have done on medium-term financial planning stands them in better stead if that's where they get to. So, as the Chair says, obviously we'll keep very close to the discussions and the options that are being presented. But as things stand, it is really difficult to see how councils can set a fully considered and balanced budget in the timescales required. I mean, I think as members will know, the 11th of March date is not a date plucked out of the air. There is also the practical implications of getting council tax bills printed and sent out to council taxpayers so they know what they're paying. And the final, I think, practical implication of that, convener, would be that the scope for councils to set council tax has in the past few years been part of the local government settlement. There is a bit in there that says councils are allowed to increase it by 3% plus inflation, which takes up to whatever it is, 4.79-ish. Now, the local government settlement comes as part of the Scottish budget process, so there's a bit of an issue there, even if some councils were to want to set council tax before the 11th of March in advance of doing a budget. So there is a lot to work through. I think as the Chair says, though, my sense is that to some extent there is a strong sense that everyone recognises that there's an issue here that needs work through. We obviously, as you say, Mr Simpson, will keep clear of the politics of it, but in a practical sense, if there's anything we can do to contribute to that discussion, then we're happy to do so.
I mean, you mentioned that there are options. So if that date is, if we stick with that date doesn't change, what options do councils have? I can't envisage any council setting their council tax without knowing how much money they're going to be getting. That's just not going to happen. So what other options are there?
Well, I was referring to the fact that I've seen options referred to in the press as people react to the announcement. And I suppose if you look at them logically, first there's, can Scottish Government do anything in the information that's available to it? And then secondly, what can councils do if there isn't a Scottish Government budget? And then you look at the existing legislation, and the 11th of March is a date for council tax, and there are practical reasons behind that. It's not just a statutory requirement. There is, as Fraser has said, the need to get bills out, and that should be linked to a balanced budget. But it may be in exceptional circumstances that has to be looked at in another way, worked around that at a practical level.
I think the only circumstances in which a council might be willing to do it, I think, is if they've already kind of decided to set it at the maximum level anyway. So some councils have done that in the past, and some councils, as I say, as well as a kind of medium-term financial plan, will actually have set a 3-year budget. And so they will have factored into that an assumption, some of them, that they would go for the full 4.7 something %. Now, if that's their plan, then they might feel able to do that in the absence of agreeing the whole budget. But that's my point then about there needs to be clarity on what the settlement is saying about the the parameters around council tax.
But we don't. Sorry, Mr. Hart.
I was just going to add something to that, in that this year's report doesn't mention very much about timing issues and setting budgets, but we did last year mention quite a bit about the kind of issues around that. But the other thing which puts it in context to some extent is Exhibit 12 within our report, where if you look at Exhibit 12 is actual council tax has been only part of the solution to closing budget gaps. A much bigger part of that is savings plans. And it's that aspect which probably gets squeezed in terms of timing, is councillors need enough time to consider properly the savings plans that are put before them to meet a balanced budget. I would say there are couple of things which probably mitigate against the timing issue. One is the fact that many have got, as Graham and Fraser have mentioned, have got medium-term plans in place. Now they'll include a range of scenarios. So there's some preparation in place for a range of settlements in terms of the thought process in councils already. And that's kind of one of the main things. So there's two things there, I think, in that the council tax isn't the only solution. The main way that councils have closed the gap is through savings plans, which should be in train and should take into account a range of scenarios in terms of the settlement. But that only mitigates, I think, the risk of late settlements.
Well, that's all very true, but you still need to know how much money you're going to have. I mean, you'll have a range of scenarios, but ultimately you need to know which one you're facing. So if they don't know that on March the 11th.
Well, I say tying that to the setting of the council tax, which is the absolutely critical thing for that date. If you are up at the cap and you know that cap is remaining, which is something another piece of information you need to know, which you don't have at the moment because the settlement hasn't been published, then you might be able to do that to get over that particular date. But that doesn't solve the problem of your annual budget, which needs to be put in place as quickly as possible.
So one final point, because it is really important for this committee in the work we do. So if there's no change to this, is it possible for councils just to do month-by-month budgets based on the money they've had previously?
It depends. I suppose it depends exactly what you mean by no change.
No change to the date of the UK budget.
To the date. Well, thered be well, first of all, they have to know what the cap is in order to be able to set a rate on the 11th, come what may, because otherwise I just don't see how they can do that, and that's a very specific issue. In terms of a Scottish budget, whether they could rely on their medium-term planning alongside having set a rate based on that and knowing what the cap is for an interim period and set a budget later is something that would need some thought and working through.
And I think from our perspective, when we say we're happy to be involved in the kind of discussions, I do think it's going to be important for COSLA government, with some assistance from the Commission on Audit Scotland potentially, to provide some guidance, I think. Absolutely, though, I would stress that ultimately it's for councils to decide how they want to do with it, and that's where I would come back to the advice from the monitoring officer and Section 95 officer being absolutely critical. The legislation, which is the Local Government Finance Act 1992, I think I was reminding myself of it last night. I couldn't immediately just bring it to mind when I was thinking about it yesterday. it does say very clearly that that there is a requirement to set council tax by the 11th of March, but there's then an interesting kind of bit at the end of that sentence which suggests that even if it isn't, it's not invalid. So that's where I think, and obviously we're not lawyers, I do think there's more work and some careful consideration of what the actual requirement is, and as I say, we're really happy to be involved in that from what we can bring as a sense of what we would expect in terms of good governance and in terms of the accounting for it, obviously, but we're more than happy to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I found reading the report incredibly useful, and we are going to come back to the very last point you mentioned in your introductory remarks about IJBs. I think the convener is going to pick that up in detail, but as part of the context we've been looking at is the long-term issues in terms of local government funding, local government budgeting, demographic changes, and the challenges in that the bulk of local authorities' spending, although it's not ring-fenced, if you look at education and social care, the top two spending areas, there's lots of government requirements, government commitments, which make it very difficult or challenging to achieve savings in those areas. But kind of interesting to hear about best practice and where local authorities have been able to deliver the same amount of service with less, but it does focus on the other services that then maybe don't get the same attention. So kind of interesting in getting your views on savings that local authorities have made and what savings actually constitute on the ground. Does that mean less services or less people providing the same service? And what is best practice in that context when there are pretty difficult decisions to be made?
Well, this report is specifically focused on finance, and we have the report that will come out in March, April that will look at services. And the one we brought out last year in March looked at services and dealt directly with this issue you raise about the gearing effect of squeeze on non-protected services, because as local government funding comes under pressure, as certain areas are protected either directly or indirectly, and they are large areas of spend, that means a much smaller area of spend is bearing the brunt of the cut, and therefore it's a much bigger cut. And I think we highlighted a number of areas in the Performance and Challenge report last year where there have been cuts of 20% and more in areas like planning. And the areas that do get cut tend to be perhaps not as high profile services in that they're immediately in the public eye, so they might be regulatory services, but they're still very important. Or they may be areas that do get attention, such as road maintenance and such. And so they do come under more pressure, and that's a feature we pointed out in the past. In terms of good practice, first of all, it's down to individual councils, each of which has a different set of operational challenges to meet and a different set of resources to meet those, to set its own priorities. And there are areas of good practice as well as a general move forward. I mean, everyone's now signed up with the digital office and is focusing on that area to reform and redesign services, which is a really good thing. And we share good practice where we can directly, and also through the improvement service, taking our work and looking into what's done. And in terms of examples, I'll offer colleagues.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up, Chair. So I think there's a couple of things in the question to do with, so some of the tools that are available, I would point to the local government benchmarking framework, which the committee has looked at in the past. That's a really important tool for councils to look at, and a lot of that is cost indicators. So it's about how much does it cost to provide a particular service, and if some councils are apparently delivering something more cost effectively, then our expectation is that councils, particularly within their kind of similar family groups, would look at that. And I think evidence is that that's beginning to get a bit of traction. There are some quite active networks around some service areas in particular. The improvement services obviously closely involved in that, and they've, in this last 12 months, launched a new bit of work specifically around sharing experience on what they call transformation we try not to use that word too much, because our experience is that some of the transformation plans aren't actually that transformational, but we know what they mean. It's about redesigning services. And in terms of your question about what are the nature of the savings, I think it's a real mix. There's no doubt that for many councils, all councils probably, there is a timing issue here. So most councils need to deliver savings in the year quite quickly. And quite often the way of doing that is either reducing a service, cutting a service, or reducing the number of people doing it. That's the way in which you manage to release cash savings quite quickly. But of course that can have unintended consequences. The real challenge then is for councils to make those bigger service design changes, which are not only a bit longer term, but in many cases actually require some investment in the first place. And that's the real challenge, I think, for councils, is to make that shift from just cutting and reducing services to identifying the areas that they need to invest in, which should deliver efficiencies in time, but are actually much more about improving services and improving outcomes for communities. My final offer, I guess, convener, is that I, on behalf of the Commission, do best value audit reports, as you know, across all 32 councils. And so if the committee were interested in specific examples, you'll find them in there. We tend to pick out specific examples in councils where they're doing some different or innovative things around efficiencies and savings and transformation. So.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And moving on to that, you've talked about trying to take a longer term perspective in terms of redesign or savings in terms of services. Another way for councils to make their budgets balance is to increase fees and to increase income. And I wondered if there's any trends that you think are interesting to picture on. What is the variance in fee income across our local authorities? And are there any issues of local authorities looking at each other and identifying different types of fees, and any work being done on the impact of those on residents?
And there are a couple of things in that. First of all, in general, clearly local authorities are generally looking at increasing fees or introducing fees and charges as a way of supplementing income. As we point out in this report, fee income is the order of 10% of income, so that is never going to provide the solution. It's always only going to contribute. And we haven't carried out a specific piece of work, which is what it would require to go through this comprehensively, because this is based on the audit work. But it's clear there is a wide range in charges, and we note some of that in this report from between authorities, which is historical. And clearly, when authorities are in that position, they are going to be looking at their peer groups to see what others charge for, and indeed what the private sector charges for, and at what levels it charges, and they're going to look at where they can raise income without having too great an adverse effect on behaviour. And one of the issues, again, we pointed out in the Performance and Challenges report in March last year, I think, is that clearly when looking at fees and charges, authorities need to take account of the effect it has on citizens, particularly vulnerable citizens, and indeed on local economy, how it will affect patterns of shopping if it's retail. And so it's not a straightforward thing to do, but it's an area that all of the authorities need to look at, because they need to diversify their sources of funding.
Yeah, just to say, a couple of years ago, most of the councils undertook or took part in a benchmarking review of their charges by a consultancy firm. So most councils are aware of how they benchmark against other councils in terms of fees. There's obviously a wide range of fees, and one of the difficulties for us practically is how we keep tabs on all those fees across those two councils. What we basically do is we look at a basket of fees and charges each year to try and get a flavour of the general direction, and that's what we try to relate to you. But I think there is scope for us to look at it more, but it's important, as I think as Graham pointed out, as we say in the report, 10% of total income is fees and charges. So a budget gap of 1% overall would require a 10% increase in fees and charges to balance it. So it is only part of a solution. not the whole solution to closing financial gaps.
I think that's very useful. I suppose those two things are the areas where local authorities have some kind of agency and have some kind of choices that they can make in terms of increasing income through the council tax or through fees, which puts the wider pressure on Scottish Government funding, which is the vast bulk of the amount of money that comes to local authorities. Can you give us a bit of background in terms of your total figure for Scottish Government funding to councils and outline what exactly is included and what is not included in that figure?
Are you referring to the sort of 55% of Scottish Government funding on non-domestic rates plus direct funding?
Looking at the total figure.
The 9.8 billion?
Yeah, so there's different approaches taken by different organisations in terms of what is Scottish Government funding and how much it actually is.
Yeah.
So some things are ring-fenced, some things are general funding that comes straight forward to local authorities. And when you look at Exhibit 4, actually quite interesting variations between different councils in terms of amount of Scottish Government funding. So just wanted to just go below the headlines on the figures.
So I'll maybe ask Chris to help us with this, but I think page 10, just to check, we're talking about the same headline, Exhibit 2, and members that have been on the committee for a while will know that every year we have a conversation about whether it's gone up or down, effectively. And I guess we'd kind of hoped we'd got past that this year, but we haven't, for completely understandable reasons. So I mean, in simple terms, when we talk about no, indeed, indeed, and so when we talk about the 1.1 cash increase or the 0.7% real terms reduction, we set out what's included in that in Para 7 and Exhibit 2. So that is our focus on the money that comes from Scottish Government directly to councils as part of the settlement. I think some of the numbers that Scottish Government have quoted subsequently has included capital, so you add the whole lot together. But when we come up with those headline numbers, Ms. Boyd, that's what we come up with. Chris, is there anything you want to add to that?
So just in terms of the total, if you look at Exhibit 2, our source for that is the financial circulars. And if you look at, we've split it into revenue grants and NDR, and revenue grants you can split further into the general revenue grant, which makes up the bulk of it, and then you've got the specific revenue grant, which that's what the Scottish Government refers to as being ring fenced, and then for this exhibit we then use indexing from the Office of National Statistics to then get the real change. So that's when we move from the kind of 2% cash to the 0.2% real.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Andy?
Thanks very much, Convener. Thank you for coming in today. I've just got a few sort of random questions over your whole report. I mean, thanks again. It's a very useful kind of insight into what's going on and quite a lot of rich information in there. I just want to look at the question of reserves. You say in your sort of key messages in part 2 that 23 councils have reduced their general fund reserves over the last 3 years. No council has a position where this rate of depletion would eliminate the total general fund within 3 years. You then go on to say, I think that Murray Council, whilst not, this is para 32, would, at this current rate, would actually deplete its general fund, though, within 5 years. Back in 2017, you said that 3 councils, Murray, Clackmannanshire, North Ayrshire, were at risk of depleting their general revenue reserves within 3 years. But you report now that none are at that risk. What lessons can we learn, and what changed with those 3 councils that were sort of at risk in 2017 but are now in the clear?
I think the story's probably slightly different for each of them.
Yeah.
I'll ask Fraser to go through that.
Yes, and I might not be able to give you the story for all 3, Mr. Whiteman, but for example, I mean, to be fair, I seem to remember that North Ayrshire weren't delighted about being in that 3 at the time, because their pattern of reserves use from memory at that point was for quite specific purposes. They were investing in things, I think, would have been their argument. So to say that they were going to continue doing that at that rate, I don't think they would necessarily have said that was an accurate description, although it was correct in that sense. So I think there were different reasons across the board, and I think what's happened is they've changed their use of, they've changed the pattern of use of the reserves, which meant they're not in that boat anymore. So in terms of the committee's interest in long-term sustainability, I do think reserves is an important measure, and the fact that they do all now have a reasonably good cushion seems to me quite an important measure that we can take some comfort from. But as the Chair said in his introduction, we, as you know, will continue to bang the drum that it's not just about how much reserves they're using, it's what those reserves are being used for. And if they're continually being dipped into just to top up and to plug a gap every year, then that isn't sustainable. They can only be used once. And I think councils understand that, and that's why we continue to bang the drum for medium-term financial planning, because it's legitimate to use reserves, in a year or two, as long as it's part of a longer-term plan to get back into balance and to replenish those reserves. So slightly different pictures across the piece, but I think for me it's really all about ensuring that, and we do see some good examples of this, that reserves policies are absolutely integrated with that medium and longer term financial planning. And we're seeing quite good examples in some places where, for example, the reserves policy will be risk-based. It'll be, the amount of reserves held will be based on a pretty thorough understanding of what's coming up. Whereas there are still some councils who will say it's 2% and we'll just go with 2 or 3%. So I think the more sophisticated we can get, the more assurance we can give the Commission and the committee about how that's been done.
Okay, and particularly, in para 32, you talk about Murray Council identifying a further 3.7 million drawn reserves will be required to balance the 2019-20 budget, and that the Council's budget papers clearly recognise this approach to financial management is not sustainable, will need to be funded from savings, but they've not yet been identified. Is it fair to say that Murray is still facing some significant issues and problems?
Everybody's looking at me because I'm also the auditor to Murray Council as one of my other responsibilities. Yes, it is fair to say that, and I think I'll come back to a technical issue about some of the changes over the years, but we have recognised for a number of years that Murray needs to get to a point where it sets some quite difficult budget decisions in order to set itself back on a track, which means it's not using reserves at the rate that it's currently using them. And one of the reasons that I want to go back to the technical issue of why it's changed from 2 years ago to now, it actually changed last year to some extent, the technical definition of this, where we reported there were no councils in this less than 5 years category, less than 3 years category of running out of reserves risk. One of the changes has been because, as you point out in paragraph 32, Murray Council plans to use 3.7 million, but what we were finding was that what was planned to be done and what actually happened was often very different stories. So we moved after a couple of years ago to move away from what was planned to be used to the more traditional audit area of historic use, which is why the graphs that we have now look at the average use over the last 3 years. And that's to get away from the difference between what councils might plan to use can be very different from what was actually used. So there has been a slight technical change over the 2 years about how we measure this, but it still doesn't get away from the fact that some councils are using reserves up at a significant rate, and that's not sustainable, certainly not long term, and in some cases Murray Council is not sustainable over the medium term, and some difficult decisions have to be made.
Okay, thanks.
Perhaps that debate, I guess, has started about the implications of doing one thing or the other. But we would, I think, certainly agree that if there were to be significant changes to any part of the system, it needs to be looked at in the round, and the changes in one part of the system need to be understood in a different part of the system. That seems to me reasonably straightforward. And then also, to come to your point about timing, a consideration would be over what time frame would any changes be made. So, because presumably changes could be made over a period of time to ensure that if there was a significant change like that, the other mechanisms would have the time to be put in place. So I guess our encouragement, for what that's worth, it would be to make sure that we're looking at it in the round.
Okay, just one other question on this particular issue then. It's, I mean, you know, are there any comparable international examples of where local control has either boosted competitiveness or indeed led to additional and higher rates burdens? Because one of the reasons why they had the universal rates was because of concerns that some areas were charging excessive rates, and businesses were obviously concerned about that. So is there any international examples of how this is a devolution to local community or local authority level has actually worked either positively or not, as the case may be?
So I think, as Mr Whiteman mentioned, there's lots of places where local business rates are devolved to councils. And
but what's the impact? Sorry.
So I don't know what's the short answer,
right,
because
okay.
we've not done that bit of work. But we can certainly see what we can see. And of course, in England some years ago, the change was made where individual local authorities keep the rates raised in their area, and I think that's had a pretty varied effect depending on geography and other things. But again, I think, if anything, it seems to me, having not studied it very closely, but the English experience is an example where you do have to look at that in the round. The system of local government and funding in England was already really quite different to what we have in Scotland. So you can't, you need to be sure that you're comparing apples with apples.
But in Scotland, sorry, we might have to look fundamentally again at the whole distribution formula for local government. Do you think, as part of this?
Well, I mean, as it happens, as you know, the Commission in the last couple of years has said that we think the distribution formula is probably worth a look anyway, even before this debate came up. And that was something that the Commission said in the last two of these reports. Given how it's evolved over the years, and we know that's not an easy thing to do. But yeah, I think, as I said again, Mr Gibson, that if you're looking at non-domestic rates, I think you need to look at how non-domestic rate fits with everything else.
Yes, and I would just reiterate that in terms of the comparisons as well. I think if you are looking at other countries, you need to understand how their whole taxation system works for businesses as well as public funding to see how it fits in that framework.
Yes, you can't really look at necessarily models of other countries specifically. You can only get allusions to it. Just one other thing, if I may, convener, another area, which is just about debt. In actual fact, I noticed that in paragraph 45 of your report, you touch on the Treasury's decision in October of last year to announce interest rates on new Public Works Loan Board loans would rise from 1.81% to 2.81%. Which you're going to say will make new borrowing or refinancing of debt for councils through this method more expensive. I'm just wondering what the long-term implications for our local authorities are of that change.
Well, clearly it's a significant increase in the interest rate that's charged, albeit Public Works Loan Board debt is relatively cheap debt. And I think, as we've said, to the extent that that councils need to draw on that, it will be more expensive. It's nearly a 50% increase in the rate. We're not privy to the reasoning behind that, but I'd note that whereas in Scotland the use of Public Works Loan Board debt has been sort of relatively stable. I think there was a 5% increase in use last year. I think in England it was quite different. There was a 75% increase, and clearly there was a significant increase in demand, and that may have been a factor causing an increase in the pricing to try and deal with that. So whether that's something that will continue or abate, I don't know, but it will simply increase the cost of borrowing significantly going forward as things stand.
And it would certainly require councils, and I know that they are doing this, it would certainly require them both to look at the affordability of existing loans and, almost more importantly, looking ahead at what their plans were to assure themselves that the change in rate on PWLB is still sustainable.
So is your instinct that it's been increased perhaps to reduce borrowing down south in Scotland has just been kind of collateral in terms of that?
Well, I'd say I've got no information in that. I'm just sort of looking at it at a sort of really basic economic level. That if the usage is increasing very dramatically, perhaps the way to deal with that is to increase the price. No more than that.
If I could just add on paragraph 37, I think it's worth noting that the vast majority of capital expenditure in Scotland is funded from government grants. Now that's a different position, in my understanding, south of the border. So if there's been an increase in PWLB borrowing, it may well be related to the availability of government grants down south. So I think that although it's an important factor, it's not the main source of funding currently in Scotland. Government grants are. My other understanding about this is though PWLB rates have increased for new loans, it brings it back to a rate which was the same rate only a year or 18 months ago. You know, it reached a low point and then increased to a point which is consistent with recent rates over the last couple of years. So it's an increase, yes, but it's not a major increase. It's a recent history has been similar rates, and it's not the main source of current borrowing.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding was it varied from about 0.7 to 2.79% in 2017, and the rate was actually set according to the risk of the capital investment that was actually being looked at. So, for example, Fraser talked about commercial loans. You'll know that North Ayrshire Council had this, frankly, in my view, ludicrous plan to spend £72 million on a 47-year-old shopping centre a couple of years ago, which was defeated by 17 votes to 16 at the council, thankfully. And, you know, they were told they were going to have to pay the maximum Public Works Loan Board amount. But on just... I appreciate what Mr Howth has said about, you know, about grants, etc. But debt for local authorities did increase by £300 million over the year. So any of that borrowed against the Public Works Loan Board is obviously will be significant if the rate has increased. And it was just to see what the impact was going to be going forward.
Clearly, there's a significant increase in the rate, and it will impact behaviour to a degree. And Public Works Loan Board has traditionally been a cheap form of funding, and indeed, when Fraser earlier referred to commercialisation of just buying a shopping centre funded by Public Works Loan Board money, I mean that raised competition issues because the authority was using below market rates to compete with commercial companies.
Thanks.
Thank you. We are running a bit short of time, but and the chamber starts early today, so if we can just make our questions and answers concise, please. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you. The Commissioner's focused very much on the benefits of medium-term financial planning, and you've gone into all of that. And you believe that that is at the core and strategic planning level within our councils. And they have taken that on board over the years, and we now find that the majority, if not all, are now doing that quite successfully. But there's a vast variation amongst them, and that in itself can cause some concern as to how they see and what they see as their priorities. So it would be good to what the key elements really then are to ensure that there is improving aspects of that financial planners management. But why do we have the variation still when you as a commission have advised and given them, and there's been best practice, all of that happening, but it still hasn't been taken on board completely by them all?
Well, I'll try and do this quickly, but just to give some context briefly, it's not that long ago, maybe 3 years, where you would have councils saying you can't expect us to have medium-term planning when we only get 1 year settlement. So it's been a process, and we've now got to a position where everyone's carrying out medium-term planning, and I think that's a good thing. And in a public sector context, I think that's a good thing. And we're continuing to raise the bar by now looking more closely at what they're putting into their medium-term plans. They will be different because councils are different. They have different challenges and different priorities, so it's reasonable that they're different. And they also have different ways of going about budgeting. The way they allocate specific reserves as opposed to unidentified reserves is different. The way they look at risk is different. So they're not always going to be the same, but we're trying to raise the bar and continue to spread good practice and do the same with longer term scenario planning as well. So it's a process.
And there are definite challenges for the longer term planning scenarios, and they've been identified, and once again you've been supportive as to what you should give in suggestions of how they should manage that. But it comes back down in some councils to the administration, the councillors themselves, how confident they are in the advice and support that they are given by the officials to ensure that that is the case. And I know there's been lots of training and support mechanisms put in place for the elected representatives to make that happen, but there is still some way to go on achieving that, and it would be good to get your views on how we can once again cross that and ensure that they have the confidence in making sure that can happen, because in long term affects the goodwill in the process and also the efficiency in running of the council as it goes forward.
And the training of councillors and their knowledge is essential in this, and it's something we emphasise. And it's I have to say it's a two-way street. It's not just the council providing, and that there are councils where we're saying they should do more to provide training, but there's also, I think, a responsibility on the individuals who are councillors to be satisfied they've equipped themselves to be able to do the job as well. Fraser,
the only thing I would add briefly, Convener, is that I think, as the Chair said, we now have a good baseline in that everyone has a medium-term financial plan, and by medium-term we mean up to 5 years. And we'll keep banging the drum about the longer-term stuff. But then you're into a more challenging conversation about a qualitative assessment, both about the process that's involved in those plans. So, for example, to what extent have communities been engaged in that discussion, or has it been drafted in the office of the Director of Finance and presented kind of question, and then also the quality of the plan itself. So to what extent is it a simple, there's a worst case, an expected case and a best case scenario, and we crunch the numbers, or actually does it really take account of what your place and your communities are going to be like in the next 5 to 10 years, and what does that mean? So I think that's the stage we are now in the process. We will continue to play our part in that, I think, and we continue to engage with the Directors of Finance on that question about the quality of that process, and we're always really willing to help with the training and development of elected members to help them play their part.
And as we found out and we discussed earlier, the whole idea that government sometimes forces with their initiatives and what policies they want to bring forward, their priorities, have an impact on what the council can achieve and can do. And we've looked at things like the IJB, where they have had a real significant difficulty because what they set out as their plan and what they may have seen as their options changed and became much more difficult to manage because of the financial differences and balances from what they want to achieve and what they can achieve. And that's had a knock-on effect in reserves and everything else along the process because, as I say, they set out with a plan, but they've not been able to achieve that plan because of the circumstances that they find themselves in the differences, which may be population dynamics or all of that comes into the equation. So that makes it even harder for them to quantify and to make that a reality.
So yeah, it's not easy, absolutely accept that, and in a sense, I suppose what I would say is that these are big and complex organisations. Glasgow City Council's budget's 1.3 billion or something. I think it's reasonable for us to expect that there is exactly that kind of rigour in financial planning and strategy, because it's public money and it delivers services for some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. So we've never said it's easy, but we are going to continue to press the case for why it's important.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to go on to the issue of the IGBs. I see that a third of IGBs were struggling to agree a budget this year. What is the barriers? What are the key barriers to this? What is causing them to have difficulty to do this?
You've been meeting them recently.
Well,
so.
it's an excellent question, Convener, and I'm not sure we have the answer for you in simple terms. I think that will almost certainly form part of the work for this next year, actually, because I think there's definitely something for us about properly getting under the skin about what the barriers are. But just slightly more anecdotally, things like the different budget cycles of the partner organisations has been cited as an issue. So the fact that councils and health boards actually budget on a different cycle, so that when IGBs are trying to set a budget in March, the NHS budgets aren't finalised because that happens in June, is one practical thing that people have cited. But there are more to do. There are more kind of, I think, more fundamental issues, many of which I think, and Brian, as an auditor of some of these organisations, will want to come in here. The integration schemes, amongst many other things, set out what happens when there's a variation in spend, either an underspend or an overspend in an IGB. And increasingly we see that as being a point of contention in some places. So as real life is now beginning to kick in IGBs, it tends to be overspends, I have to say, tend to be the more difficult areas. That can get in the way of agreeing how much money each partner is going to put in for the following year. So I think there probably are some common themes, but I think there will also be quite a lot of specific issues in individual places.
See before Brian comes in, can I just ask, but when they were putting the IGBs together, did they not have a system in place to say if there's an overspend, this is how it will be divided?
They do. So they all have that.
So,
but
what's the problem?
So the problem is then it actually happens in real life, and money has to be paid and exchanged hands.
It really
That's a
works well
very
on paper.
simple
Yeah.
way of putting it. Can be. I don't mean to be flippant about it, but all integration schemes have a way of dealing with those circumstances, and it varies. So some have just said we split the overspend 50-50. Some will have it 70-30 in line with the overall funding. There are different ways of approaching it. But in real life then what happens is that, and this is hypothetical, but we hear it happening, a health board will say, well, but wait a minute, that overspend is all in social care. So why are we picking up 70 or 80% of the tab for that? Or a council will say, well, actually this year the overspend's been in medicines. So I know what the scheme says, but that doesn't seem right. And in a time when both partner organisations are under real pressure in their own finances, then that becomes quite a tricky conversation. And we see that conversation happening across the land, and indeed many of these schemes are up for review anyway, so a lot of this stuff is already being looked at.
Okay, sorry, Brian.
I was going to say, timing-wise, we know it's an issue. Do we understand exactly the reasons why? No, and that's something we'll pursue in this next year. What we can say with some certainty is it's not systematic. So we had a look, for example, if there's one health board area, it's not the case that every IGB in that area is late with the budget. So it's not a systematic issue. The other thing I think to bear in mind is even if a budget's agreed, Exhibit 14 is a good example of this, which demonstrates this, is even if a budget's agreed, it may not be fully balanced. There might be a large element of unidentified savings in it. So there's more work for us to do on that to establish exactly the reasons why. And going back to earlier questions, the announcement of the Westminster UK budget coming late this year, might mean we're in an even exasperated position in this year. But it's something we want to get more to the bottom of, is why are budgets not being agreed on time, and a bit more about the nature of those budgets and whether they are truly battened down budgets, or why are there large elements of unidentified savings.
Does that gel with what you had said earlier on about people promising to, organisations promising to do this, and then you find that they weren't done? So you went 3 years back for their accounts, 3 years back. Is it that sort of thing that they're putting the money in, saying that they've got savings that they're going to put in there, but they're unidentified, so you don't know where the money's coming from? So is it really going to happen? Or?
Yeah, I think that's a good general point, and I think the evidence for that is that in the report we say that, and sorry, I'm not picking the figures out correctly here, but I think about 8 recorded a deficit, 2 broke even, but a much larger number, I think it's about 19, would have recorded a deficit had they not been bailed out at the year end by the 2 partner bodies. Now, that's symptomatic of the fact that when they set off at the start of the year with the budget, they thought they wouldn't have that position. 9 of them or so would thought that they would have been able to break even, but couldn't. So there is a difficulty between budget expectation and budget reality at the end of the year, which we see in microcosm in that number that had to be given additional year-end funding from the partner bodies.
Okay, thank you for that. Another issue, the key issue, I suppose, is the significant turnover of senior staff in IGBs. Is there any common theme, or have you got any suggestions about why this is taking place?
Again, that's something we don't have further detailed information on. It's more anecdotal, and I'll ask colleagues to comment. I think when I was here before at the round table, I did comment that not only is that a cause of difficulty because of the turnover in leadership, at a time you need to manage a lot of change, but it may be a symptom of a structure that individuals are finding very difficult to live with, and they'd rather not live with it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's going to be different in different places, convener. But there's no doubt that the job of a chief officer is a difficult one. They are accountable to the chief exec of the council and the NHS board and the IGB itself. So it's a pretty complicated accountability structure, working in quite tricky circumstances. But there's no doubt that we can see places where that churn and that turnover has prevented progress being made more quickly. It's hard to make some of these big decisions and these difficult decisions when there isn't sufficient stability in the senior team, I think. So it's difficult to say exactly what's happening in all those cases, but it's definitely something. And we would really hope, as we move into whatever we are now, year 6 or 7 of IGBs being in existence, that we see a degree of flexibility. Given the amount of change there was last year, you would hope that would begin to tail off a bit, but we will continue to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, it's just on that, if you were doing further work in IGBs, would you be looking to speak to these senior officers to find out if there was any common threads about why they left?
Yeah, so well, there's a couple of things on that. So as part of the annual audit work that we do every year in IGBs, obviously there's routine engagement with chief officers and chief finance officers in particular. So in those cases, we will have a reasonably good sense of why changes will have been made. We do have a third national report on integration lined up for the next couple of years, which is going to begin to look at outcomes, really. So having done 2 reports for the Commission and for the Auditor General, the third one's going to be asking the question, so what difference has it actually made to services and outcomes? And thirdly, just as a bit of a heads up, the Commission has asked me to think about what best value auditing would look like in IGBs. That wouldn't be kicking off for 18 months or so, but we're beginning to develop an approach that would allow the Commission to take a kind of sharper focus on the best value duty that integration authorities have. So once we get into that level of work, I think we'll be able to unpick some more of the specifics of what's happening in each of the 31 integration authorities.
That'd be helpful. Just one last question from me, and then Annabelle wants on. There seems to be different approaches to managing shortfalls. I'm hearing that some of the IGBs are relying on funding injections during the year. Are you concerned that that undermines the transparency of IGB funding?
Well, I think as Brian said, it's certainly a reflection on the budget setting against what's actually happening and the way the partners are working together with the IGB management. In terms of transparency, I would think that's down to precisely how they manage that. I don't know if you have a comment.
It's hard to generalise on this issue, but I think that an attitude might be taken by the partner bodies that the IGB should try and deliver quite a challenging budget in that year, so not fully fund any budget gaps. But if reality turns out through the year they aren't able to manage that because of demand pressures or other things, inevitably that means that both host partners have to fund that. I mean, effectively, they are funding that anyway, because in the IJB, the fund flows are notional. Actually, the overspends are occurring in one of the partner bodies. And I think while we see the order of 20 having underlying deficit issues, what we're not yet seeing is kind of systematic overspends in the partner bodies. Now that's probably because partner bodies are managing to manage that overspend in the area of the IJB off against underspends in other areas of their budget. You know, in the NHS that'll be against acute services, or in the councils it'll be against other services such as education, corporate services, etc. But while that underlying deficit continues, I think there is a real risk that we end up with host partners being affected and returning more and more deficit positions if it's not managed within the IJB services.
And do you get that information? I mean, for example, if extra money is getting put in from the health service or the local authority, would you get that information about where that money came from, or would it just be that they put that money into the IGB to cover, well, normally put it into the IGB to cover the deficit?
And what we do is, I mean, we try and collect information across all 30 of the IJBs from local auditors. So we're particularly interested in in how much additional funding has been received during the year and when. And that gives us our figures for whether they have been deficit funded at the year end. So we are interested in whether they've actually received further funding during the year. We may not always know the ultimate source of that additional funding, you know, if it's come from, say, Scottish Government additional budgets in NHS, for example. But we are very much interested in that, and we're reliant on the quality of data we're given by local auditors.
Okay, thank you. Annabelle?
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, gentlemen. So it's been a very interesting look through the consequences of your report. On the IGB issue specifically, I mean, I note at paragraph 108 that actually for 2018-19, that you stated over a third of IGBs have experienced turnover in their chief officer or chief finance officer in that year, which is really quite remarkable. And I just wonder, what happens then? Do these individuals go back to the local authority or to the NHS or Scottish Government? Do they get a payoff, each of them? Where is the scrutiny of this coming in? Also from a financial perspective, because this is really, I think if you were to look across the public sector, this is actually a very, very alarming statistic, really. And I just wonder, where's the scrutiny around this, given the public money involved?
Well, clearly it's a significant statistic, which is why we've highlighted it, and it has an impact on how IJBs are able to operate. There's going to be a whole variety of specific circumstances because the way staff are provided varies quite significantly across IJBs. And Fraser, you
I mean, I'll kick off, then Brian can talk about the detail. But the scrutiny comes in the annual audit work that we do in every public body in the land. But for this case, IGB. So when a senior person leaves, that's always part of the audit work in that year to look at the nature of that departure and whether there were any payments. I can't promise you this, but off the top of my head, I think the vast majority of these kinds of leavers have either gone to different jobs, either in different IGB or somewhere else, in which case there would be no payment attached to that at all, and a good number of them have retired, and so you would expect the normal process to apply there. But that's something that auditors in that year will look at and report on in their annual audit report. And if there's anything untoward in IGB land, then I would be reporting that to the Accounts Commission. So that's how the scrutiny process works, Brian. Is that fair?
Just to support that level of scrutiny, I am a local auditor. I'm a local auditor to 5 IJBs, 5 councils, 2 NHS bodies and pension fund. Across my 5 IJBs, so that's 10 chief officers and chief financial officers, 3 left during the year. We do look at both exit interviews in terms of where we can, where they're willing to come back and talk to us about the reasons for that. Now, whether they're fully candid with us or not, that's another thing. But we also look at whether the terms under which they left. Now, out of that 3 I'm particularly directly related to, 1 retired, 1 moved to a different job, 1 did get a redundancy package, and we looked at that as part of our normal audit in the host body for which that individual was employed. So we do that local scrutiny routinely. Anybody that's a senior officer and leaves, particularly those noted on the remuneration report, we look at the approval process and the business case for those individuals.
And the positions, as a matter of fact, are the positions then vacated, filled reasonably quickly, or what is the position? Are we seeing a number of IGBs without these senior positions filled?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, because there have been a good number that have ended up with interim arrangements for quite a long time. So that's definitely an issue. I mean, there's no doubt that if you look across the board, there are a lot of senior important jobs to fill in a relatively small pool. So, you know, we were in a meeting only yesterday, Brian and I, with an IGB, and there were 6 people around the room because there are 3 chief executives and 3 directors of finance for that one area. Now, if some of those leave the backfill of that is quite challenging. The Auditor General reported on the challenges of recruiting to senior posts in the NHS. We've recruited in the past about the challenges of recruiting in some places in councils. So yeah, the interim arrangements can be an issue, and I think that is why we raise it in here, is as much as it's about the turnover, in a sense, more importantly, it's about what that means in terms of progress and what it means for pace of progress. And certainly in some places we can see where there has been that churn of key roles. It's not that they have to start from scratch, but there is inevitably, if somebody's left and somebody else has come in, a bit of rework and a bit of resetting is required. So it can absolutely get in the way.
And just to make the point that turnover at that level, it's not just going to affect their ability to execute change. When we talk about budgets not being agreed in time and unidentified savings, it's going to affect the day-to-day business as well, because it's going to be disruptive to the whole organisation.
No, I understand that Fife was in that position. Sorry, I should have said gentleman and Liz Duthie, sorry, but please excuse me. One other issue on that, on IGBs, I mean, it just strikes me that this whole debate, and I did welcome, I think it was Fraser who mentioned that you would be moving to looking at best value auditing and what that would look like, but IGBs have been in place now for some time. Why are we moving so slowly to get these things in place? Should that not already be in place?
Well, I think...
Because otherwise we don't know what value we're getting from this whole process.
Well, auditors have been reporting on best value up till now, and the reports have tended to be quite short, in that they're simply not meeting the best value criteria. And it's as IGBs have developed their role more, there is more of an opportunity in a proportionate way to expand the audit of IJB specifically to examine that. If they're not basically doing very much, you're not going to spend resource on putting people into audit stuff that isn't happening. And as Fraser said, on the next set of audits, we want to expand that. And there is a lot of scrutiny going on in IJBs. It's not just audit scrutiny. It's other inspectorates do a lot of work on IJBs, and the work that Fraser's doing for us is really looking across the board at all the scrutiny work that's being done and how we can utilise that and essentially identify any gaps that we need to look at there. So it's not that there's no scrutiny work being done, there is scrutiny work being done, but we look at it through a specific lens of best value because that's the statutory requirement. And up till now, there hasn't, as I say, been a sort of proportionate case for doing more, but going forward, we are doing that. I don't know if you want to...
I think just briefly, Chair, to say that, so you're absolutely right that they should be doing it. They have a duty of best value, and that's why we do check on it, and we will be checking on it in future. I think, to be fair though, I think it's also worth just saying that the duty of best value and therefore the auditing of best value needs to look quite different in IGBs, because as organisations, they don't really employ their own people, they don't have their own buildings, they don't in a way that a council does. So the nature of the duty of best value actually is quite different and needs a bit of thinking, when effectively they're strategic commissioning bodies that get services from the council and the health board. So that has required a bit of thought on their part, and actually the approach that we've taken has been consistent with our approach to best value in the past, where when the duty was first introduced, we started with councils and then we came to police and fire authorities when we had them. And I think it was reasonable to let IGBs kind of try and get their feet under the table a little bit. But they've done that now, or they should be doing that now, which is why we're now looking at the next phase of best value.
Thank you very much.
Graham, you had a brief...
Yeah, it's very brief, and it's to follow up on something you said, Mr. Howarth. You mentioned one case, and there's probably more across the country, of where a senior officer was made redundant, presumably with a sort of hefty payoff. So what would be the circumstances under which somebody would be made redundant in an IJB? And was that person, well, shouldn't be replaced, but were they replaced in some way?
The standard thing, and this doesn't just apply to IGB, senior officers would normally be redundant if there was a major restructure of senior management team. And that might involve a change in services. In the one case I was involved with, there was a major change because children's services was removed from the IJB and taken back to the education services in the council. So the nature of that individual's role changed quite drastically. There is still a chief officer of an IJB, but it's a different role now. And yes, that did result in a payment, and we looked at the business case for that and the payback period for it.
So was this person a chief officer?
Yes.
And then but you still have a chief officer?
Well, they also have other roles within the council sometimes. This is the difficulty about they don't not always have responsibilities just as a chief officer in IJB. They can have responsibilities within the council as well. But the nature of the IJB has changed because the integration scheme has changed. The nature of services and integration the Integrated Joint Board changed drastically. Children's services were taken away from it completely and remained adult services.
We're really short of time.
I know, but it's opened up a whole
It
new
has
can of
opened up, but
worms.
we're going to have to do a bit of work around about IGBs anyway. Kenny, very briefly.
No, it's just, I mean, we've just heard how difficult it is to replace these chief financial officers and, chief officers, and yet because one aspect to their job moves, they get to redundancy payments, which then they then move out, and you're left with the disruption of having to find another person to replace them, and the impact on frontline services of all that. I mean, how can that possibly be justified?
There, Kavira, briefly. So, I don't mean to sound flippant, but it's not for us to justify it. It's for the board and their employing authority, and I think it's important to remember that one of the other unique things about IGBs is that the people who are the chief officers are normally employed by either the health board or the council. So the reorganisation doesn't necessarily just need to be about the IGB. It can be actually in the council or the NHS. Our job, as Brian's described, is to look at the business case. There will be a payback period, so savings have to be made in order to justify any payment as a result of a restructuring. And to make sure that it's regular and it's in line with policies and things. So, but the justification for the decision rests with them in the first place.
Okay, that's something that we'll probably be looking at further as a committee. Listen, can I thank the chair and his colleagues from Audit Scotland for attending today's session. That was very useful. I now suspend briefly to allow the witnesses to leave the table. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is a consideration of public petition PE 01719 from Rachel Gibson on behalf of Cartcraigs Roads Tenants Association. This calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the current stay put policy as it applies to the fire strategy for existing multi-storey residential buildings. The petitioner has provided a short update which is attached to the public paper for our consideration. I invite members to the attached note by the clerk and I invite comments. You'll see that there's a recommendation in it to keep the petition open and to raise issues relevant to the petition with the Minister for Local Government, Housing and Planning at our evidence session on building regulations and fire safety on the 22nd of January. We could consider next steps after that. Any comments?
Comment, if I may, Convener. My understanding is that actually, although it would be interesting to hear from the Minister on general issues, but the stay put itself is an operational matter for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. So I don't think we will get to the nub of the issue without speaking to them.
Well, the Scottish Government are aware of that. We've got the option of discussing the point you raised at a later meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Andy?
Yes, I mean, just looking at the evidence that was submitted to the Petitions Committee in relation to this petition, I mean, it's clear that the stay put policy remains the operational principle adopted by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the National Fire Chiefs Council, and that one of the work streams of the Ministerial Working Group, Scottish Government Ministerial Working Group, was a review of Scottish fire safety regimes for domestic high-rise properties. And a number of recommendations were made on that, and one of the most valuable was to provide better fire safety guidance for residents, which I think is very, very welcome. And I know the petitioner does live in a high-rise, and I've no doubt of the anxiety that must be induced by people living in high-rises as a result of the Grenfell fire and the associated publicity around that. So I've got a lot of sympathy with the petitioner. I'm not convinced myself, having looked at the evidence that was given to the Petitions Committee, that there is any evidence that the stay put policy should go. It is a default position which can be departed upon by fire services, obviously, and is departed on by fire services where they consider it necessary. But it is the default position, and it's been established over many, many years. So in the absence of evidence that it's not working, and I've no doubt, you know, Grenfell still, the second part of the inquiry still has to conclude the first part, is there will always be incidents where a policy that's adopted is not properly implemented. No doubt, you know, there will be errors and mistakes made by all public services now and again. That does not in and of itself justify changing the policy as such. So I don't see the evidence that would suggest that this needs a review, but I'm very happy to defer those kind of questions to the meeting we're scheduled with the Minister later this month. Sarah?
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. I think the points made in the petition and the additional comments Annex A, I think what they flag are people's concerns and issues about whether buildings are compromised, either because of external cladding faults or because of lack of fire-safe doors. So I think they're particular things that we need to raise with the Minister, which sit as the framework, I think, behind the stay put policy. And they're the things about both the integrity of the building and the fire safety policy that we need to come back to when we next speak to the Minister.
Okay, okay. But it's agreed then that the points that have been raised we can discuss with the Minister, and given that this Cartcraigs is in my constituency, I'd be very keen to make sure that the Minister has got suitable responses for us. Okay, thank you very much. I now move this meeting into private as agreed earlier in the meeting.